We now come to the motion in the name of the Leader of the Opposition on winter fuel payment. Mel Stride, Shadow Secretary of State, to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I beg to move the motion on the order paper? Madam Deputy Speaker, the decision to remove winter fuel payments has come as a complete shock to millions of pensioners. Pensioners on as little as £11,500 a year. We had no adequate explanation as to why these measures are so urgent. We've had no explanation as to why they had to invoke the special emergency provisions which allow them to bypass the scrutiny of the Social Security Advisory Committee. We've had no explanation as to why no impact assessments were provided. This is a major policy change which will remove entitlement for up to 10 million pensioners, including many who are already in poverty. It is a cut worth £7.5 billion over the course of this Parliament. Rushing such a policy through without taking time to consider impacts ensure effective and fair implementation and allow possible scrutiny is impossible to justify. This is not the way to make good policy. This is not good government. It is worth considering the conclusions of one of the few bodies which has been afforded the opportunity to scrutinise these regulations. The Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee in the Lords have been damning in their criticism of the government's approach, and I refer the House to my remarks in the previous debate when I quoted them at some length. As the committee point out, such measures would normally be subject to consideration of the SAC. This is an important part of the process for any legislation of this nature, as I know well from my time as Work and Pensions Secretary. Conveniently, ministers have claimed the measure is too urgent to wait for the SAC scrutiny. We understand SAC is due to consider the measure, Madam Deputy Speaker, tomorrow. Can the Minister commit to the House today that SAC's report and the Government's statement responding to any recommendations will be laid before Parliament, before the regulations come into force next week? As the Laws Committee has pointed out, it would seem wholly inappropriate for SAC's views to only be taken into account once the regulations are already in force. In the words of the committee, and I quote, "It remains unclear what the practical impact of any statement might be on regulations which will have already come into effect." And if the Government does not intend to provide us with SAC's observations before the House rises on Thursday, why were members asked to consider and vote on the prayer motion against the regulations today before SAC has met? The lack of any impact assessment also means we are severely hampered in our ability to scrutinise this measure. We were told in the explanatory memorandum that, and I quote, "a full impact assessment has not been prepared for this instrument because there is no significant new impact on business, charities or on voluntary bodies." This seems a bold claim to make about such a measure which removes hundreds of pounds of support from some of the most vulnerable elderly households in our country. Guidance from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence is clear that for a vulnerable person, particularly those over 65, living in a cold home increases their chances of serious illness or death. They note that being housebound increases both exposure to an underheated home and to the cost of heating it. So can I ask the Minister on what basis it was concluded that there will be no significant impact from this policy on those charities and organisations who support elderly people or on the wider health and social care system? And will the Minister now commit to the publication of a proper impact assessment? The only basis for the urgency seems to be a claim that this measure is vital for public finances. We have even been subjected to the Shadow Leader of the House claiming it was needed to avoid a run on the pound. But the only relevance, and I might ask the Minister to comment on that when he appears at the dispatch box, but the only real relevance of a measure of this kind to the public finances is its impact on the government's fiscal rules. Those fiscal rules are based on levels of debt and borrowing at the end of the OBR's fiscal forecast period in 5 years' time. And the rules the Chancellor has claimed she will sign up to were already being met when the government came into office, according to the OBR's own forecasts. The government could have opted to bring this measure in next year, with greater time for scrutiny, better notice for pensioners, more time to drive up pension credit uptakes, and perhaps time to consider whether there were much better ways of going about it. It would still have been a broken promise, and we on this side of the House would still have opposed it, but it would have been a much better way to make policy, and it would still have delivered exactly the same savings at the end of the forecast period. Ministers will claim they needed to make immediate in-year savings. That is based entirely on a black hole that they have confected themselves. The real reason this is being rushed is pure politics. The government want to rush this measure through, while they can try to blame it on their predecessors in order to avoid proper scrutiny. There is no need whatsoever for the haste with which this is being done, other than I will certainly give way to my right honourable friend.
Grateful to my right honourable friend, and does he, like me, find it inexplicable that they should fail to go through proper process when their own research suggested that thousands of people could die as a result of precisely this measure? And that is something which I think the whole House should find deeply uncomfortable.
Friend makes a very powerful point. This is a very, very serious step that this government is taking. And of all those steps that should be properly scrutinised, surely this is one of them. And I remember when I was sitting on the other side of the chamber, Madam Deputy Speaker, I could barely breathe without the cry going out there should be an assessment, impact assessment held. And it is extraordinary that on such an important measure as this, affecting millions of the most vulnerable, that the Labour Party should be utterly silent on this issue. And I give way to my honourable friend.
Right honourable friend, old people die in cold homes, and they die particularly if they're very old. Does my right honourable friend think that if the government is not minded to change its mind in its entirety, it might look at those aged over 80, because of course they are in receipt of the high rate of winter fuel payment, and at paragraph 3 of the regulations points out there is a difference between those over 80 and those under 80. That might be perhaps one way that the government might make this slightly less worse than it otherwise is.
And for his intervention, it has been suggested that the government is examining ways in which they may ameliorate some of the harshest effects of this policy, and it may be that that is one of those things that they are looking at, but I will in a moment. But on that particular point, of course, we cannot escape the fact that whatever age people are, over 2/3 of those who are currently pensioners below the poverty line will lose their winter fuel payments under the current arrangements. And I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. I have the honour to represent the most remote, sparsely populated and coldest constituency. The Secretary of State, in responding to my honourable friend, the member for North East 5, said that the government will try to maximise the take-up of pension credit. I accept that. But would the government accept that sheer remoteness and sheer distance can mitigate against people taking up this offer? And would the government please, via your good self, please look at this issue? It means an awful lot to my constituents.
I'm sure that the front bench will have heard the honourable gentleman's intervention. The reality is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the government want to rush this through so they can blame it on their predecessors, as I've said, to avoid proper scrutiny. There is no need whatsoever for the haste with which this is being done, other than to meet the political ends of the Labour Party. They are ripping the plaster off and hoping the country will have forgotten by the time of the next general election. That is at the heart of it. But we will not forget. We would not have been given the opportunity to debate and vote on this measure without significant pressure from both the opposition and the wider public. This is nothing to do with fiscal responsibility and everything to do with political expediency. No scrutiny, no impact assessment, no notice. This is an appalling way to govern.
question is as on the order paper. Minister James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a serious topic, and we know from debates earlier this afternoon it is one on which members across this House and people across this country have strong feelings. We understand that. This is a difficult decision to have to take. By means testing winter fuel payments, we know that we will be ending future payments to most pensioners whilst maintaining our steadfast commitment to protecting those in greatest need. But though they do not like to be reminded of it, members opposite know exactly why we need to take this step. Because it was members opposite, and indeed now former members of this House, voted out by the British public, who did such damage to our country's economy and the public finances. The legacy of the last...
Harriett Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, for taking my point of order. This is the second government minister that we've heard from the dispatch box today, and yet we saw only moments ago the Chancellor sitting on the front bench. It was the Chancellor who chose to spend billions on setting up Great British Energy. It was the Chancellor who chose to spend billions on giving it to their union paymasters in pay rises. It was the Chancellor.
The Honourable Lady, for her point of order, she'll be aware that that's not a point of order but more a speech that she seems to be seeking to make this afternoon. She'll perhaps find an opportunity to contribute in the debate. Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the honourable member who just intervened, and indeed everyone on that side of the House, might like to reflect on what the legacy of the last government truly was, which is one of irresponsible overspending, of uncosted commitment after uncosted commitment, and of ministers running away from taking difficult decisions. As a direct consequence, when we came to power, we were faced with a £22 billion black hole in the public finances for this year alone. I'll give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm genuinely grateful to the Minister for giving way. He is a Minister at the Treasury, so I'm hoping he will be able to outline some of the facts and answer my question. He has outlined today, or he will outline, that the savings made by cutting the winter fuel payment is £1.1 billion. The means testing, if everybody accepted the means testing that he is proposing, it would cost £3.3 billion. So can he outline to the House, despite the bluster that he's just made about saving money for the great British people, how will that when it's costing more under his proposals?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and the savings announced include an assumption of an increased take-up of pension credit, which is in line with the highest levels that have ever been achieved. And frankly, if more people are taking up pension credit when they are eligible for it, that is something that we should welcome, because it means that support is being targeted at those in greatest need. I'm going to make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker. The opposition did not like to be reminded of their legacy when they were in government, but let's have a look, shall we? What do they have to show for their years of reckless overspending? A failed asylum system, prisons at breaking point, more than 1 million people waiting for council homes, 4 million children growing up in child poverty, more than 7.5 million people on NHS waiting lists. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government and every member of this House who stood on our party's manifesto was elected to turn things round. I will give way.
Grateful to the Minister. Yesterday in the other place, the Transport Minister cast doubt on the continuation of travel concessions for pensioners. This has caused significant alarm in my constituency and others, notwithstanding the discussion we're having today. Could you just reassure us that travel concessions for pensioners will continue under a Labour government?
Well, thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. The Chancellor will take all decisions as a budget. But Madam Deputy Speaker, let me make one really important point to the honourable gentleman as we approach the budget on October the 30th. We know there are going to be difficult decisions that we have to take in the budget on October the 30th. And frankly, that is the direct consequence of the decisions taken by him and his colleagues when they were in government. I'll give way to the honourable woman.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and as he is a Treasury Minister, I wonder if he could help me with a question. How many of the pensioners who will lose the winter fuel allowance today earn or receive less than the average train driver they've just given a pay rise to?
Well, I understand the political point the honourable lady is trying to make, but let me be really clear about if she's talking about pensioners, the foundation of state support for pensioners is the state pension, and that is why we in government have committed to maintaining the triple lock for the duration of this parliament. The triple lock, no, I'm going to make some progress. The triple lock means that pensioners are having £900 more this year. Figures released this morning indicate they may get well over £400 more next year, and over the course of this Parliament, £1,700 more is the amount the pensioners will get under the state pension. That is the foundation of state support for pensioners. I'm going to make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we saw how clearly members of the party opposite do not like to be reminded of their legacy in government, of the mess that they left the economy, our public services and the rest of our country after their 14 years in office. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this government and every member of the House on this side of the House was elected to turn things round. We are under... No, I'm going to make some progress. We are under no illusions, though, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know this will be a slow and difficult process when the damage goes so deep, but we are determined to fix the foundations of our country so that on the bedrock of financial stability and fiscal responsibility, we can get our economy growing after 14 years of the Conservatives. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Minister for giving way on the point of fiscal responsibility. I'm not sure of the morality of trying to balance the fiscal books of this country off the backs of pensioners. He referenced the manifesto that the Labour Party stood on in the election. No austerity under Labour was said in Scotland. So what should the 37 Scottish Labour MPs do in this vote? Should they bow down to the Chancellor, or should they stand up for their Scottish constituents?
Thank you. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, every member on this side of the House was elected on a promise to restore economic stability and fiscal responsibility to our country. And it is on that basis that we will get the economy growing to make people across this country better off and put our public services on a sustainable footing. And may I remind the honourable gentleman that winter heating assistance is a devolved matter in Scotland. The Scottish Government intends to legislate to introduce a means-tested payment this winter, which is equivalent to the winter fuel payment in England and Wales. I'm going to make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've taken several interventions. I'm going to make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the point of this debate is to focus on why we have to take difficult economic decisions, even if they risk us being unpopular. Now, we know that the universal application of winter fuel payments was already recognised as unfair. In the face of our dire economic inheritance, it is simply unsustainable. We should be clear that when the winter fuel payment was introduced in 1997, a higher percentage of pensioners were in poverty than people of working age. That is no longer the case. Put simply, there are now pensioners who receive the winter fuel payment who do not need them, and that is a reality we cannot afford. Let me put this in financial terms, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over a quarter of pensioners have wealth of more than £1 million. Half have wealth over £500,000, and a fifth of pensioner households have gross incomes equivalent to £41,600 a year. That is why it is right to means test the winter fuel payment. I will give way to the honourable lady.
Grateful for the honourable gentleman to give way on that point, and pensioners in my constituency will be feeling really saddened by the way that he's caricaturing pensioners as wealthy and not in need of this winter fuel support. Age UK have said that in the Gosport constituency alone there are 15,000 pensioners who stand to lose their winter fuel payment. These are not people who are wealthy. They are people who in many cases are just outside of the pensions credit limit, who are hanging on by their fingertips. Does he agree with me that caricaturing them as wealthy and not in need is so unbelievably insulting?
So I think the honourable lady unintentionally misunderstood my point, which is to put the question perhaps back to her, whether she feels that pensioners who have wealth over £1 million, who earn more than £41,600 a year, whether they should get a winter fuel payment in the context of their financial circumstances. Because the argument that we are making on this side of the House is that given the dire economic situation that we face, given our dire inheritance, we should means test the winter payment. I'm going to make some progress because it is an important point. It is an important point to explain why we are choosing to means test the winter fuel payment. Because means testing will allow us to make sure those in the greatest need still receive the help they need. We will make sure that all pensioners continue to benefit from the triple lock, and we will start to deal with the shocking state of the public finances that we have inherited. I'm going to make some progress. I've taken many interventions already, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, under our approach, those eligible for pension credit will continue to receive winter fuel payments. We want to target winter fuel payments to those on the lowest incomes, which is why we are linking its payment to eligibility for pension credit and other qualifying income-related benefits and tax credits. That is the right approach to help those on the lowest incomes, and we are determined to make it as effective as possible by making sure people who are eligible for pension credit make a claim. I'll give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the point I made earlier to the Shadow Secretary of State is a fair one, that distance and remoteness does mitigate against take-up. People living in very remote hamlets and islands don't necessarily see the department that they should. Can I have an undertaking from the Minister that the Government will look at this issue?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his comment, and I know that my colleagues are aware of this issue, and in fact it's one reason why the automatic payment is so important of pension credit and other benefits. So, for instance, the merging of housing benefit and pension credit, which would help to overcome some of these problems, I suspect might help some of the people in the situation he's describing. That merger of housing benefit and pension credit, I believe, was first mooted in 2012, was delayed several times by the party opposite whilst they were in government. I think they last left it as being in 2028 when they left office, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, is looking at that as a matter of a great priority to ensure people get the help that they deserve. No, I'm going to make some progress right now, because the important thing to focus on in this debate is also about making sure that everyone eligible to pension credit, as the honourable gentleman said, takes up that offer of pension credit, not only so that they receive the benefit from pension credit, but also so that we can better target the winter fuel payments given the financial inheritance that we have. We estimate, Madam Deputy Speaker, that up to 880,000 pensioners are missing out on pension credit that they are entitled to, and frankly there have been years of the party opposite failing to act on this, which is why it is so important that we are now conducting campaigns to make sure as many people as possible make a claim. Madam Deputy Speaker, our approach is already showing signs of success. The Government has received around 38,500 pension credit claims in the 5 weeks since the announcement on the 29th of July. That is more than double in the 5 weeks before, and we will continue to do all we can to encourage pensioners who are eligible to apply for pension credit. We have used I'm going to make some progress. We have used a wide range of media to reach pensioners and key stakeholders, and have been working with voluntary organisations like Age UK and Citizens Advice, local authorities and the devolved governments to raise awareness through their networks and channels. My colleague, the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions, is taking the further unprecedented step of writing to 120,000 pensioner households who are in receipt of housing benefit but who are not yet claiming pension credit they are likely to be entitled to. Our national pension credit campaign will run right through until the application deadline on the 21st of December. I'll give way.
On the 11th of February 2021, the temperature in Braemar and my constituency sunk to minus 23 degrees. There are estimated 17,000 pensioners who are going to lose their winter fuel allowance as a decision taken by this Labour government. Can he now stand at that dispatch box and explain to them why they are having to surrender that important support in one of the coldest constituencies in the country at the same time as this government is finding £11 billion to give pay rises to their union paymasters?
Well, I'd be quite interested to understand why the honourable gentleman is backing a candidate, as I understand it, for leader of his own party, who supports a means testing of the winter fuel payment. Perhaps he might want to have a conversation with the candidate for leader he's backing on his own side before he starts criticising our approach, which is to target support of those in greatest need. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the critical point for us is that the combination of the state pension rising with a triple lock and those in greatest need getting the winter fuel payments alongside pension credit, not to mention the extension of the Household Support Fund, means that the right measures are in place to give all pensioners the support they need. Now, I'm going to make some progress. Now, members opposite want to know through their motion why this legislation is being progressed urgently, and let me be really clear with them about this. It is urgent because we need to urgently deal with the £22 billion black hole, the huge in-year spending pressure that we inherited from the government that they ran. It is crucial, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we act quickly to restore responsibility to our public finances and stability to our economy. And on top of this, it was important that we made sure the regulations were in place at the start of the qualifying week for winter fuel payments, whilst wasting no time in doing all we can to raise pension credit take-up. I'll give way.
We've heard that Transport Minister only yesterday could give no assurance to pensioners about their transport concessions. Last week I asked the Deputy Prime Minister about the single-person discount on the council tax. So there's a very real prospect for pensioners as they go into this winter. They could be losing even more than this £300, £300 or £400 on that. Could the Minister take this opportunity as a Treasury Minister to reassure pensioners there's no way that this government is going to remove the single-person discount from the council tax? It would be politically good for the Minister and the Labour Party, and it would be enormously important to people who need to hear some reassurance at this time.
Absolutely. The honourable gentleman won't be surprised to hear me say that the Chancellor takes all decisions at the budget. But maybe he might like to reflect on the record of his party whilst in office when it comes to encouraging take-up of the pension credit. Because we, on this side of the House, have been painfully aware since taking office how little the party opposite did to increase take-up of pension credit during their 14 years in office. That is why it is so urgent for us and making such progress when we are trying to get people to sign up to pension credit where they're eligible for it. Because by doing that, they will get pension credit, which they have been missing out on for years under the Conservatives, as well as continuing to receive the winter fuel payment. Madam Deputy Speaker, pensioners may well be angry at the Conservatives for how little they did to get people to sign up to pension credit whilst they were in office. Pensioners may well be angry at the Conservatives for leaving us, this country, with a legacy of a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. We are committed on this side of the House to protecting the triple lock, and that will mean that pensioners on the full new state pension who have received an extra £400 this year will, pending the Secretary of State for Pensions uprating review this autumn, receive a boost that could be well more than £400, and by the end of this Parliament could be receiving around £1,700 more than they do today. Madam Deputy Speaker, the party opposite is keen to play politics with the tough decisions this government is taking. They are desperate to take attention away from the fact that, as people across this country know, it is the Conservatives who are to blame for the economic mess we face. They created a mess, and now they want to criticise us for cleaning it up. Madam Deputy Speaker, if they had governed more responsibly, they may not be sitting on that side of the House, in opposition to a government who is fixing the foundations they left to rot.
Can I ask the Minister if he agrees with me, the only shameful thing in this debate is the legacy that this government has left and forced the new government into. The reality that 800,000 pensioners are not on the pension credit to get this is a shameful legacy. If the party opposite wanted to show some humility and learn from their record in government, it would be to note that they are the ones who crushed the economy, they are the ones who broke the NHS so pensioners can't get doctors' things, and they are the ones that broke NHS dentistry. Will you agree to me it is our job to fix the economy so we can keep on helping pensioners?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. And quite frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is time for the party opposite to recognise and accept what they have done to this country and to show some contrition and accept responsibility. But frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, no matter what the Conservatives choose to do, we are getting on with the tough decisions necessary to be made in government. By changing the winter fuel payment, by making it means-tested, we are beginning to take the necessary steps to address the black hole they created whilst protecting the most vulnerable in society. The Prime Minister has said that we must be prepared to be unpopular if we are to govern responsibility, and that means facing up to the tough challenges and tackling them head-on. The motion laid by the opposition lists several regrets, but they have never once shown regret for all the reckless decisions they took and all the damage that they did to our public services, our public finances and our economy. Our task now in government is to fix the mess that they made and to give our country the chance at the better future we deserve.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. Liberal Democrats welcome the opportunity for this debate, and we will continue to call on the government to change course on its planned cut to winter fuel payments. We know that the government has inherited a mess, and we know that at the cause of that mess is a legacy of reckless economic mismanagement left behind by the previous Conservative government. But that cannot be allowed to serve as a cover for measures that cause suffering for the most vulnerable in our society. Earlier this afternoon, Liberal Democrats supported the prayer motion to annul the Social Fund winter fuel payment regulation, stripping support from many of the poorest pensioners just when energy bills are set to rise again this winter is the wrong thing to do, and we have tabled our own EDM to reject these plans. It should be noted that the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee in the other place has said that it is unconvinced by the reasons given for the urgency attached to laying these regulations, and particularly concerned that this precludes appropriate scrutiny. We are supportive of this motion and particularly of the point that there should have been greater scrutiny of the government's decision to cut winter fuel payments. It is well established that there are strong links between living in a cold home with an increase in the risk of serious illness for vulnerable people and for those with disabilities. It'll be a pleasure.
I thank the member for giving way, and I want to rise today to say that I am absolutely disappointed at the lack of creativity in this government. I'm standing here today on behalf of my constituents in Lagan Valley, and I agree entirely with the member that actually there is a legacy of unfunded promises. However, it is not up to my constituents in Lagan Valley to bear the burden. Would the member agree with me that they do not have broad shoulders?
I thank the member for her intervention and for stating so passionately the case that we on these benches are making in this debate. The Liberal Democrats think the government should have done far more to understand the likely consequences of restricting eligibility for the winter fuel payment and how that would translate into increased burdens on the National Health Service. I and my Liberal Democrat colleagues have listened to our constituents and heard from countless pensioners who were worried about how they will afford their energy bills this winter. Since these cuts have been announced, I have been inundated with local people expressing their disappointment at this decision. And that's why the Liberal Democrats have tabled an early day motion calling on the government to withdraw these plans. It is why we voted in favour of the prayer motion earlier today. We believe it is simply wrong to remove winter fuel payments from millions of struggling pensioners.
On that point, will member give way?
Yes.
I recognise the comments that you made about the economic inheritance, but would you agree with me that compared to the situation we managed in coalition with the Liberal Democrats in 2010, actually Labour now have unemployment lower than we inherited, unemployment higher than we inherited, the deficit lower than we inherited, economic growth faster than we inherited. We managed to keep winter fuel payments in those circumstances in partnership with the Liberal Democrats. Don't you agree that they could do the same?
Well, I thank the member for his intervention, but I think it's important to reflect upon the disastrous legacy of the mini-budget and the circumstances that many people continue to struggle with, thanks to higher interest rates on their mortgage payments, and certainly from the perspective of my constituents, that casts a much longer shadow that these winter fuel payment cuts is going to do nothing to ameliorate. Last week, I asked the Chancellor if she would give her full support to measures to boost the uptake of pension credit. And I welcome her commitment to work with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to maximise the take-up of pension credit by bringing forward the administration of housing benefit and pension credit. It will be a pleasure.
We've spoken a lot about the take-up of pension credit in this debate already, and I think it's important to say that those, I think it's 800,000, the Minister said, that are still not taking it up, are by definition going to be the harder to reach people and the most vulnerable. And so I don't understand how the government can, in good conscience, take away this guaranteed benefit at a time when there's no certainty whatsoever about being able to get the other people signed up to pension credit in time.
I welcome my honourable friend's intervention. He makes an important point, although I would say I welcome the Chancellor's commitment last week to work with older people's charities and local authorities to raise awareness of pension credit. But my honourable friend is exactly right that many, many people will have this benefit taken away without knowing that there is pension credit that they are eligible for and for which they should claim. But as the Lord Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee have highlighted, the DWP have assumed that the uptake of pension credit will increase by just 5 percentage points, and that will still exclude around 700,000 pensioners. Has the government made a proper assessment of what the impact will be if uptake of pension credits increases by more than that amount? And I continue to call for assurance that the government ensures that all those eligible for pension credit claim both the benefit itself and the winter fuel payment. Now, whilst we'll be voting against the scrapping of this stream of support for pensioners, and we recognise that the government faces difficult choices given the appalling mess left by the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats will continue to advocate for the necessity of the winter fuel payment. The mismanagement of our economy by the outgoing Conservative government has left formidable challenges, and we understand that undoing that damage is not going to be easy. Nevertheless, it is not right. With pleasure.
Thank you for giving way. Whatever about the fiscal pressures which are being addressed here today, we've heard about the possible impact in terms of additional deaths as a result of this measure. Does the honourable member share my disgust when, at the end of the last vote, some members opposite celebrated the result as if it was a football match?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I can't comment. I'm afraid I didn't see that, but thanks for raising it. Nevertheless, it is not right for the consequences of these decisions and this burden to be carried by some of the most vulnerable in our society. Those with the broadest shoulders should carry a heavier burden. Liberal Democrats have set out detailed proposals to tackle fuel poverty, and we are calling on the government to look at them very seriously. This includes steps such as launching an emergency home energy upgrade programme with free insulation and heat pumps for low-income households, introducing a social tariff for the most vulnerable to provide targeted energy discounts of vulnerable households, and implementing a proper windfall tax on the super profits of oil and gas producers and traders to raise vital revenue. And we have also called on the government to tackle the wider cost of living crisis, including by investing an extra £1 billion a year in our farmers to bring down food prices, increasing the carers allowance and expanding it to more carers, and removing the 2-child limit and the benefit cap. Now, more than 2 million pensioners are currently living in poverty. They've had a tremendously difficult time during the cost of living crisis, dealing with record-high energy bills and eye-watering food costs. And that's why the Liberal Democrats are proud to have introduced the triple lock when we were in government, lifting countless vulnerable pensioners out of poverty, and why we are strongly committed to ensuring it remains in place in the future. Pensioners deserve to have the support and the security of knowing that the triple lock will be there in the long term. We do acknowledge the dire economic situation which the new government has inherited, and yet we have heard warning calls from sector representatives, including Age UK, Disability Rights UK, and indeed many pensioners themselves regarding the damage that this cut might cause. As the government tries to clear up the Conservative Party's mess, it must ensure that this does not come at the expense of pensioners and families who will struggle to heat their homes this winter. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Point of order, Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. You will know the rules far better than me, but this is a really important debate, and I just want to ensure that the House is quora, and can you tell me how many people have to be on the government benches for a debate? Because there are under 20 Labour MPs that have decided to find this a worthwhile debate to come here, and I want to make sure we have enough people here for this debate because it's really serious. Thank you.
As the honourable gentleman will know, the House is not counted. There is not a quorum, and so therefore we shall move on with Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was proud to be elected on a manifesto which committed to delivering economic stability, security and growth. After 14 years of Tory recklessness with our economy, after the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget drove up inflation, food bills and mortgage repayments and pushed my constituents to the brink, the public voted for change. And that change must start with getting our economy back on its feet. When the last Labour government left office, Trussell Trust food banks were giving out 40,000 food parcels a year. Last year, they gave out 3 million food parcels. Shameful. So when we on this side of the House talk about the recklessness of the previous government, it is not academic. We're talking about taxpayer money being poured into ideological gimmicks while children are going to school hungry, working adults are one rent rise away from homelessness, and a broken NHS is stalling productivity and failing those who most rely on public services, including our pensioners. A £22 billion black hole in the public finances they covered up and they walked away from. Stability means bringing the economy and the country back from this brink, which the party opposite knowingly pushed it to. No one doubts that this policy is tough. It's not a measure we want to take, but we have been left a huge bill to pay. Means testing the winter fuel allowance will allow us to support those pensioners most in need. As we take the difficult steps, we have to right the ship. Members across this House know that in our communities there are too many pensioners struggling. That's why I welcome this government's commitment to the triple lock, by which the state pension has risen by £900 this year and will raise by over £450 in April. I support the extension of the Warm Homes discount, worth £150 to more than 1 million low-wage pensioners. I will give way,
The honourable gentleman. He'll be aware that the Tory triple lock was introduced by the Tories precisely in order to deal with the legacy left by the previous Labour government when, unless I've got this number wrong, there was a lower take-up of pension credit than there is today. So we raised that. The triple lock raised pensioner incomes, and the first act of the Labour government, which he is clearly aiming to be a loyal member, is to take £300 away from people who really, really do need it.
3 million food parcels last year. That is the legacy of your government. That is your legacy. And the triple lock, which you purport to defend, you broke it in 2022. You broke it.
You did. You did.
I support, too, the extension of the Household Support Fund to help families most in need this winter, and the government's commitment to introduce tougher regulation on the energy market, which has let customers down for too long. I'm working hard with Bracknell Forest Council to make sure that pensioners in the Bracknell constituency who are in need and not claiming the support they are entitled to are identified and encouraged to get help. And I urge any pensioner who's concerned about their finances to go to Age UK's benefits calculator to see what support you may be entitled to claim. I will give way.
What did you say to pensioners during the election campaign?
I said that this party would restore the broken economy that we inherited from the party opposite. That's what I said. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the long term, there is only one permanent solution to ending fuel poverty. We must end our dependence on volatile foreign energy markets and deliver lasting energy security, something the party opposite failed to do while they were in government, leaving energy bills higher for every household, including those most in need. That is why this government's plan to create a new national energy company, GB Energy, is vital. It will bring energy supply back in the hands of the British public, and help get prices back under control. This is the solution to fuel poverty long term. Homegrown, British-controlled power. I will give way.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. There are roughly 13,000 people in his Bracknell constituency who will not get their winter fuel allowance this year as a result of the changes that he's just voted for. How many of them does he estimate will struggle to pay their bills?
I've already set out the support I want to see in place and the support that this government have put in place to support pensioners in my constituency. And moreover, the support to help all households in Bracknell and across the country to see long-term energy bills coming down. That's really important, and it's the first step on the road to growth. And because of the triple lock, a growing economy means growing pensions and growing support for pensioners in need. Madam Deputy Speaker, future prosperity doesn't fall out of the sky. We have to create the conditions for it. And those conditions are sensible spending, bringing debt under control, and encouraging investment. To do these things, we have to dig ourselves out of this financial hole. And that means tough choices. This policy is a difficult step. It is a step I did not want to take. But it is a step away from the brink towards stability, security and growth. And that is why I back it.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to have no choice but to put a limit on backbench speeches, which I am very sorry to do before handing over to the next speaker, but members will be aware there are over 40 of you wishing to take part. Dame Priti Patel, 3 minutes.
Well, who would have thought that one of the first acts of this awful, cruel, ideological Labour government would be to assault the nation's pensioners and remove winter fuel payments? And I think let's be quite candid, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are now seeing the nation's pensioners fall victim to what is an ideological decision, Labour's betrayal, while they've literally succumbed to their union paymasters through the gross amounts of public spending that they are shoveling in the pockets of many of their paymasters. It's quite interesting. I've got a time limit, you've just spoken. It is quite interesting that there's been so little transparency around the finances and the fiscal choices that this government has chosen to make. No impact assessment, for example. No honesty around the cost of all of this to the Exchequer in the long run. Nothing around the administration of the Household Support Fund. And so I would actually like to ask the the front bench, Labour ministers, about how they have literally made this spurious claim that they had no choice in this decision, when, bear in mind, a member of their government claimed a couple of weeks ago that they'd be run on the pound without this decision, which is just extraordinary and speaks to the fiscal ineptitude of this government. So desperate are they to justify this brutal cut. So, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have a series of questions on the mitigations. First, on pension credit. It's right to encourage more pensioners who are entitled to take this up, that they do so. And I know from my time in DWP and many on these benches have spent many years encouraging more pensioners to take up pension credit. So I think we should know how the targeting is going to work and how this is going to, what this is going to cost as well. Second, on the increase in state pension. In recent days, the government has been spinning yet again that those affected by the loss of the winter fuel payment are going to benefit from an estimated £400 rise in the state pension. Can the Minister confirm what the net real terms impact of this will be on overall household incomes for those that are losing this benefit? And can he confirm how this is going to add up over time and what the actual costs will be? Third, there have been concerns raised that if pensioners cannot afford to heat their homes, there will be serious impact on health, and we've heard this throughout this day today. Without an impact assessment, can we have some honesty now? What are the costs to the NHS? And I think this government owes it to the British people to be honest about this. On the Household Support Fund, we've heard it's going to be extended, but can we know exactly how this £500 million is going to be funded? Who is going to be paying for that? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are so many unanswered questions that this government must answer, must be honest. There's been a lack of transparency, no impact statement, assessment whatsoever. It is right that we hold the government to account, and it's right that they are now honest to the British pensioners in terms of what their intention is, even on the future of the triple lock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I'm glad we're having this debate today because perhaps the opposition and parts of the media are bored, facing something they've not seen for years. Benches on this side representing all parts of the United Kingdom, packed full of members who respect each other and support the government. Because they have stoked a frenzy that I fear is at risk of obscuring the most important arguments for the changes we are debating today. Yes, there's the economic argument, which matters. As the OBR and IFS have recognised, this government inherited public finances in a shocking state in, quote, one of the largest in-year overspends of outside of the pandemic in history, or, as a member opposite put it earlier, an accounting error. Unlike the rapid succession of opposition chancellors, our Chancellor has levelled with the British people and been transparent about the nation's finances. Restoring stability means hard choices. This is not the first, and it will not be the last. But it is not the economic case that I wish to emphasise today. It is the principled one. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me make a general point about the arguments we make in politics. Sometimes we politicians can be too quick to hold up our hands and say, we have no choice. Lawyers require this, economists require that. This can leave voters frustrated. Why vote if the people we vote for are not in charge, but lawyers or economists are? Can the people we elect not control the things that affect our lives? To restore trust in politics, we must show that politics matters. That is why I believe it's important that we articulate what we do in terms of principles and of choices. To govern is to choose. Targeting winter fuel payments is a choice. However difficult and necessary, it is the right choice for two principled reasons. The first is about the moral purpose of the policy. Gordon Brown designed the winter fuel payment to ensure that nobody was at home cold because they could not afford to turn on their heating. It was a time when state pension rises were miserly and many found insufficient to heat their homes. And let me note a point that pensioners were better off after the last Labour government. 1 million were lifted out of poverty by 2004. These changes that we are debating today do not move from that position. In a time when the state pension has risen by £900 and will rise again by as much as £400, these changes target the winter fuel payment based on the principle of need. That is the right principle. Let me be clear. I do not believe taxpayers...
3-minute time limit. Sir Roger Gale.
Deputy Speaker, my wife, Susie, is over retirement age. She's also in full-time employment. I'm over retirement age. I'm also in full-time employment. I'm a higher rate taxpayer. I've always believed that the winter fuel allowance should be means tested. Because while we give it to charity, there are other younger people, perhaps, that are disabled, young disabled, who can't run around and keep warm, who could use the money. And I've believed that probably for as long as the now Chancellor of the Exchequer has believed it. But let's be clear about this. This has nothing to do with black holes in the economy that Laura Kunsberg identified on Sunday when interviewing the Prime Minister as being largely contributed to by inflationary pay increases for the unions, for railway workers, for junior doctors. This is a policy dreamt up in 2014, and it's on the record, by the present Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's a policy made in number 11 Downing Street and endorsed by the nation's undertaker in number 10. It is cruel, it is heartless, it is going to lead to death this winter. So while I believe that there should be a means test, I believe that the manner in which the government is going about this is profoundly wrong, deeply flawed, will cause untold of hardship, and it has got to change.
On that point?
And
on that point?
Of course.
I'm very grateful.
No, I'm giving away my phone.
thank you, the honourable member, given a moving and a compassionate speech. But where does the responsibility for this cruel policy lie specifically?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend because it doesn't lie with the honourable gentleman opposite. It lies with the Chancellor of the Exchequer and it lies with the Prime Minister, both of whom should be on that bench this afternoon, neither of whom have been present during the debates. Although the Chancellor of the Exchequer did come in to vote and then nipped out again. And that in itself is shameful. And I abhor the fact that there are politicians now sitting on those benches who are quite prepared to fight to the last drop of somebody else's political blood. Because that's what's happening here this afternoon. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
You say that our Chancellor and the Prime Minister are not here on these benches, but where is your leader and your shadow Chancellor? They're not here either. And you talk about you talk about means testing and means testing being right. When we have a difficult financial situation, we have difficult decisions that we have to take. And the honourable gentleman seems to agree with us on that.
I appreciate the passions are running high this afternoon. There are many new members in the House. But when we use you and your, it's referring to the chair. There are good reasons in this chamber why we direct debate through the chair, and please can members remember that. Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I stand chastised. The Leader of the Opposition was in the chamber early this afternoon. I saw no sign whatsoever of the Prime Minister here. But the answer to my honourable friend remains the same. The responsibility for this policy
with the unions.
lies directly with the Chancellor of the Exchequer and with the Prime Minister. And they are going to live to regret this.
Yeah.
And just to conclude, I will say this. All right.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Would he agree that, in common with his principle that means testing could be accommodated, many of those who have written to us as members of Parliament also sympathise with the principle that means testing could and should come in at some point in the future, but it's the manner in which it is being brought in before the 880,000 pensioners who are eligible for pension credit are registered for pension credit, which is the problem which particularly affects the 21,000 pensioners in Taunton and Wellington.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I've made the point, and I'll make it again. I have no quarrel with the principle. I have huge quarrel with the manner in which it is being done, because it is cruel, it is heartless. It is going to leave thousands, if not millions, of pensioners literally out, or probably more probably in the cold this winter, and some of those people will die as a result. And it is not necessary, it does not have to be done, and it will not save money. So there has to be a rethink. And just to conclude, I detect a degree of arrogance on the government benches this afternoon. The fact that there are only about 30 members on the government benches speaks volumes to those outside who thought people were going to come and hear this matter being seriously debated. And there seems to be a belief that the next general election is 5 years away. The next general election may be 5 years away, but the next election is next May. And those voting in the county council elections in May, those pensioners and their families will not forget this.
Sam Rushworth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I haven't written a speech today. I've written a few points because I've spent the last week, like many of my colleagues, agonising over how I would vote today. I decided in the end to vote with my conscience, and that meant I voted with the government, and I will tell you why. No, they laugh. They laugh, but I'll tell you why. And I listened to the debate today, and I listened to contributions from the benches opposite, and I listened sincerely, and this is what I've learnt. Firstly, several interventions in which people criticise the government's efforts to improve take-up of pension credit. Well, they have. They can go and read Hansard if they want to dispute that, but there have been several criticisms of that. Almost to the point where when they talk about who's vulnerable, I wonder if they have a blind spot for some of our most vulnerable constituents. Secondly, I've learnt their disdain for hard-working people because we've learnt that in their spending plans they intended to reject the pay recommendations of their own pay body. I will give way.
Honourable Member, I appreciate that some of the hardest working people are the pensioners that we're now standing up for and trying to stop them freezing into the winter coming and those ahead.
I absolutely do, and people may recall last week I came to this House and I asked the Chancellor a question about my own constituents. I represent the snowiest and coldest constituency in England, and I've had deep concerns about those pensioners, but as I've studied the detail and listened to pensioners in my constituency, in the last week alone, several people who've come forward to me expressing concerns about this policy, it's turned out are people who could be claiming pension credit but are not. I also want to make a broader point about the winter fuel allowance. The winter fuel allowance was introduced under the last Labour government in 1997 when the state pension was £3,247 a year. Now, if that had increased at the rate of inflation, today it would be £6,200 a year, yet thankfully it's more than twice that. Because, well, they say because of them, but again, they may want to look at the record on this, because in fact, under both the previous Labour government and the previous Conservative government, the state pension increased above the rate of inflation, and I absolutely welcome that. The winter fuel allowance, however, has not increased for 20 years. So the winter fuel allowance has, in real terms, become less and less year after year. And I think the point that I'm trying to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that I think that we need to consider are people, and if their argument is that after 14 years of them in government, that people on the full state pension are £100 away from death and destitution, what have they been doing for 14 years? Yeah. We need a new settlement for the economy, and this government is actually answering the concerns of my constituents who live in cold, stone-built, badly insulated homes, who lost out when the previous government chose to cut funding available to insulate homes. This government is setting up Great British Energy that will help to cut bills over the long term. People are not poor and struggling to pay their bills because we don't give enough taxpayers' money away in small pockets of benefits here and there. What we need is higher wages and better pensions. And I've been convinced by the Chancellor's arguments that under this government, the pension will rise at or above the rate of inflation year upon year upon year, while energy bills will fall. And finally, my constituents would not thank me if I didn't take steps today to stabilise the economy, because we need to get NHS waiting lists down. And we need...
Graham Stuart.
And it's interesting to follow the honourable member for Bishop Auckland and follow the angst-ridden journey with his conscience to ensure that he could abandon those who most need their winter fuel allowance in this coming winter. Though it was good of him to highlight the Tory triple lot, which did take the absolutely woeful state of the pension left by the last Labour government and transform it to a sounder one today. But even in these conditions where, thanks to the Tories, pensioners are much better off than they used to be, even then, there are people, and it came from Labour research a few years ago, who will die, according to that research, if this policy, which he in good conscience thinks he should vote for today, is implemented. That's the truth. And it takes us to one of the key issues we've been discussing today, and that's process. And the honourable gentleman seems like an honourable and decent man. At least he used the word conscience in this debate, rather than purely political theatre. The point is that the process is where something could lead to thousands of people dying, that the government has not done that which it is legally obliged to do. It used some rare exemption requirement to produce the impact assessment. So we don't know. So people who in good conscience, like the honourable gentleman, want to do the right thing, don't know what the impact is. Because if that was in front of us, and if it validated the Labour Party's previous analysis and showed that it could be 4,000 people who are going to die, could he really, in good conscience, do it? For what, the 1.1 billion? We'd spend over 1,200 billion? I mean, this 22 billion black hole is a sort of political theatre by a government that said it wasn't going to do politics as theatre, as performance. It was going to do it properly. But in fact, it's a minuscule amount, isn't it? It's significant. but it's minuscule in the overall scheme of things. It's a choice that has been made, which has been rammed through on a timetable which is not in order, doesn't follow the normal and proper way of things, doesn't allow new members of Parliament like the Honourable Gentleman to look at it and weigh it up and come to the right conclusion. It is truly shameful. And I have Peter, one of my constituents, is one of 882 who signed the petition in my constituency against this. He and his wife are £12 over the pension credit limit. He is one. He is obviously. I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the Honourable Gentleman giving way. I'm just wondering, he is obviously citing the concerns about the safety of vulnerable groups, and in doing so, I wonder if he might reflect that over the last 14 years, he has enabled a government which has led to the decay and decline of every single public service. Public services, when they do decay and decline, disproportionately affect vulnerable groups.
The Honourable Gentleman knows full well that that is not true. In fact, education. I used to chair the Education Committee, so I know a little bit about that. And the standards have lifted up. If you look at the OECD PISA tables, it seems like new government ministers don't want to take into account the most reputable international measure of educational performance. Showed that we lifted ourselves up massively. If you look at the NHS is under enormous tension and crisis, but compared to 5 years ago, we have 20% more doctors and nurses. If it was purely a budgetary matter. So I wish the new government well in reforming the NHS, but if you want to see what Labour government of health service actually means, you can find it right now, and you just need to travel to Wales. And the Honourable Gentleman knows that that is not delivering. But I'll return, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, to Peter and his wife. But they're not the only people who are worried about this policy, because I spent a little bit of time yesterday reading Labour's manifesto, as I hope honourable members opposite may have done. I was touched by the quote from Gary on page 48, and it reads, "I've never struggled this much to keep warm. I can only afford to heat one room with a small portable heater. Sometimes I sleep in my armchair to save money. It's no way to live." And surely members opposite, in good conscience, recognise that he's right. It is no way to live. And when 9.7 million people voted Labour, they voted for them on the promise of change. And I don't think this is the change which Gary and others were led to believe that they would receive.
Chris Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm glad the previous speaker referred to the change in the Labour manifesto at the last election, because the first line of that manifesto was the promise to bring economic stability to Britain, and that would be a change from the previous government. We knew that bringing economic stability would involve tough choices, but even at the election we had no idea of the scale of the mess that we would find. Means testing the winter fuel allowance is not an easy decision, but we must look at it in the broader context. Let me make 3 points about the situation pensioners face. Firstly, the pension triple lock. This is a critical piece of public policy. It makes the state pension genuinely livable. The triple lock means pensions increase by £900 in this year alone, and the state pension will increase by over £1,700 over the course of this Parliament. That helps all pensioners. It is absolutely the right decision for the government to prioritise the pension triple lock, even if that means means testing the winter fuel allowance. Secondly, the poorest pensioners will still get the winter fuel allowance, and I'm reassured by the push to increase the take-up of pension credit. And thirdly, sorry, I must make progress. Thirdly, we must look more broadly at all the challenges that older people face. Waiting lists are appallingly long. Older people in my constituency can wait 18 months for a hip replacement. Others spend their life savings on private health care. I understand people are concerned, but we do people no favours by pretending tough choices do not exist. Delaying that decision only makes tougher, less enviable choices ahead. Sorry, let me make progress. If you want to understand that, look no further than my home of Scotland. Despite having higher public spending and higher taxes than the rest of the UK, Our pensioners face the longest waiting lists on record. Today, the SNP will oppose means testing the winter fuel allowance in Westminster, while bringing in means testing for it in Scotland. Not to clean up the mess the Tories left them, but to clean up their own mismanagement of Scottish finances. We can do better. In taking this step, we must recognise the country has changed since the winter fuel allowance was introduced. Today, when I look around my constituency, age is no longer the main factor in whether you can afford to heat your home. That means it cannot be right we continue to give the wealthiest pensioners £300 a year. As society changes, we must adjust. We do today's pensioners a better service by targeting those who need help the most.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I also say I rise to publicly oppose this proposed change? I will begin by saying I understand the need to balance books. We all do know how it works. But to be perfectly frank, it gives me no joy to say this. I never imagined, ever in my life, that a Labour government would seek to balance the books in the backs of pensioners throughout the United Kingdom. So I put that on record at the very beginning. I'd say that very respectfully, but with great grief. I fully comprehend the system could do with an upgrade. Perhaps we should look at a household cap as we do with the child benefit payment. Perhaps we could look at allocating per household rather than per person. Perhaps we could look at ensuring that everyone who is still earning more than their pension through employment can have deferred payments until full retirement. Perhaps we could look at an opt-out scheme to enable pensioners like me. I don't need the money. I asked not to take the money. I give my money to charity. I'm not better than anybody else, Madam Deputy Speaker. Never am I better than anybody else. But I realised that money, I didn't need it, so I give it away. Others might want to do the same thing. When it comes to direct face-to-face pension credit applications, that's what they should be. And a 9-week wait for the application to be processed. My goodness, the people need the money now. Raise the threshold. Also, government and the minister said about the £440 is coming next spring. The pensioners need the money this winter and as soon as possible. In Northern Ireland, we have 68% of homes relying on oil-fired boilers for heating. There's high levels of fuel poverty, with 22% of the population currently spending more than 10% of their household income on heating from homes. So I'm going to think about the women who have a tiny works pension from the hours that they work whilst their children were in school. The WASPy women who have already been disadvantaged and will pay a further price for not being allowed to save for their needs. So I'm begging this government on behalf of my constituents in Strangford, don't remove the benefit from everyone in one full sweep. I stand for those... Yes, ma'am.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. National Energy Action estimate that close to 45 people die every winter's day in the UK due to cold homes. This government, in their wisdom, through this decision, have decided to imperil many more. Would he agree with me that it's wrong and that it will impact and will cause deaths right across the United Kingdom?
I thank the honourable member said that. He's absolutely right. We all recognise, I think it's the honourable member, he's not here, but he mentioned as well that this winter will be a one when the pensioners will feel the gravity and the pain of cold. So I stand for all those who are making do with less than £1,000 per month, those pensioners who will be impacted by this fuel allowance being taken away from them, and to whom this is a lot of money, to whom this is the difference of being warm this winter or simply surviving. This isn't an exaggeration, this is life for my constituents, and respectively I say this for the constituents on the other side of the chamber as well. I conclude, I know I'm, according to the clock has stopped, okay? Those who have worked all their lives, I'd be respectful for the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, you expect me to be. Those who have worked all their lives deserve to be paid out for what they've paid in. And there is a basic standard along with women and children first in the lifeboat. And that is those who can't survive the icy cold. So let's slow down this ship, and I look to Labour to make that happen. And veer away from the iceberg, which some members are only seeing the tip of at this moment, which could be the destruction of this government before the first journey even begins. Let's course correct and get this right and support what the opposition have put forward tonight. I think it's got the mood and the opinion of everybody in this side of the chamber, and I hope that government and the Labour Party in particular will resurrect and realise they're going the wrong way and we're trying to direct them the right way. Thank you.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you. Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to follow the member for Strangford, who I know in my short time already in this place often sits there and listens to everybody on this side of the House and across the House, and I listen to his points as well. And I would make these points to him on this debate, like so many others when it comes to our economic inheritance, which is a £22 billion in-year black hole. We have to make difficult decisions. We can choose to ignore the situation we're in. We can choose to duck these decisions. That is a well-trodden path, and it's a path too often taken by the last government. And the price of entry to that path is not free. There's a cost. It takes accepting a failing economy and failing public services. It tries to shift the problem again and again to future generations. It's an easy path, but it's not a responsible one. The alternative is that we govern as we campaigned, not just on economic stability, but on credibility and truth in politics, where we're honest with people about the mess we are in, and crucially, about the path we will take to bring about brighter days, to lower waiting times in our NHS, to get more teachers into our schools, to get more police on our streets. Delivering again for people right across the country, Madam Deputy Speaker. When a failure to deliver has become the norm, that must change. And if we ignore the problems, we cannot fix them. Since records began, no government has front-loaded spending so much to leave the second half of the year's cupboard bare. It was an easy path, but not a responsible one. And I believe members opposite know this. Indeed, there have been calls over the years from Conservative and Liberal Democrat members to target winter fuel payments to those most in need. This government is combining responsibility with compassion, and I know it's the...
Wendy Morton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the winter fuel payment gave me peace of mind that I would be able to heat my home and stay warm during the winter. Not my words, but the words of a constituent, and very typical of the many comments that I have received in my inbox and the comments that people have said to me when I've been out and about across the constituency. In my constituency, there are just 2,138 recipients of pension credit. Yet there are an estimated 18,300 pensioners who will lose out this winter. This political choice, because this is what it is, means that these very same pensioners, 18,600, will lose up to £300 winter fuel payment. In addition, the energy price cap rise of 10% puts further financial pressure on them of around £149. It impacts pensioners earning as little as £13,000 a year. Contrast that with the inflation-busting pay rises that this government has handed out. Contrast this with the billions the government is spending on GB Energy, a state-run company which won't produce any energy, nor will it cut their bills. And what's more, for the vast majority of my pensioners who will be waiting for their annual increase next year, thanks to this government, when we were in government, the £460, when you deduct the loss of £300 winter fuel payment, that leaves them with an increase equivalent to just 44p a day, less than the cost of a pint of milk. Yes, of course.
I wonder how many of her constituents will lose out on this vital payment unless the train drivers have had all the extra money.
Yeah. I think my honourable friend makes a very, very important point, but it comes back to this is about political choice. And I'm here to stand up for my pensioners in my constituency. I'd also like to point out that it was this party when in government that drove up pension credit applications by 73% in just 12 months, and it's important that we don't forget that. Exactly. But the issue of pension credit take-up is often an entrenched issue. People in my constituency, they're often too proud to apply. It's a process that is too complicated. 22 pages, 243 questions, and as we've heard, 9 weeks to determine the application. So tackling pension credit take-up is really important, but it isn't the solution to the crisis that these pensioners are facing today. Only weeks ahead of the winter, what they need is help now. According to Age UK, across the UK, there are around 2 million pensioners who badly need the money to stay warm this winter and who will now not receive it. Losing winter fuel payment will make it significantly harder for them to keep warm. It undermines their health and their well-being. Pensioners, as we've heard today, have often serious health conditions, disabilities, They often live in older properties. Those in the north, where my constituency in the West Midlands, it's often colder there than it is in some parts of the country. They are all disproportionately affected. And yet there is no sign of an impact assessment. Just a Chancellor who seemingly storms ahead with her political decision. I'm going to continue because I'm just conscious that others get the chance to speak. There's no time for older people on low incomes, no time for them to set aside money, if they have it, to help them get through the winter. Being at home in the cold risks raising blood pressure, increased risk of strokes and heart attacks, as well as hypothermia. I did not vote for this callous cut earlier today. I will not pick the pockets of those who have worked hard all their lives, doing the right thing by their families and by this country. What I will do, Madam Deputy Speaker, though, is I will continue to speak up for my constituents who deserve better than this. This is just so wrong.
Lawrence Turner.
Deputy Speaker, and I associate myself with the comments that colleagues on this side of the House have made in this debate. But I want to speak in this debate on a particular issue, which is public sector pay and the attempts which have been made in this debate and a debate which preceded it to turn pensioners and public sector workers against each other, including the public sector workers who have been driven to rely on food banks and payday loans that I was proud to represent as a trade union official, and indeed the 6,000 public sector workers in my constituency must wonder what it is, listening to this debate, that the party opposite has against them. A strong economy needs strong public services, but the problem for the last government and the public sector workers that worked on for it were that its public finance strategy rested on imposing the biggest real wage cuts in living memory. Not my words, but the words of the former Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, Nicholas Macpherson. The consequences for the services that we all depend on are clear to see. Teaching vacancies doubled over the last 3 years, an 8% vacancy rate in the NHS, 1 in 10 999 call handler posts vacant. All of us know the consequences of ambulance delays for pensioners. And of cancelled operations and appointments too. Sorry, does the member wish to make an intervention?
I'd love to thank you very much for taking my intervention. Obviously, the 15,500 pensioners are going to lose out in Basildon and Billericay because of this callous cut by the Labour government. He was pointing out the issues at the impact on the public services. I was wondering, how many more hospital missions will we have? How many more people will have to have operations because of this cut that his party is putting forwards? Or will we not be able to find out because his party won't even put forwards an impact assessment so we can know who is affected?
We will take no lectures on this side of the House on hospital admissions or the state of the NHS that his party has left us. Now, the party opposite has claimed that they did not know what the pay review body recommendations would be. But the school teachers review body's recommendations were known to ministers before July, and they will know also that the different PRBs tend to make similar recommendations. And why were most of those recommendations not submitted in good time? It is because ministers were late in submitting their evidence, pushing the timetable until after the election. As the Office for Manpower Economics has said, the work of the PRBs is demand-led and essentially non-negotiable. Departments set the remits and timetables. Now, shadow ministers talked about productivity gains, but when it came down to NHS negotiations under the last government, productivity was just a slogan. In the negotiations, the cupboard was bare, they had nothing to actually ask for. I will give way.
The honourable gentleman is making a case comparing the salaries of working individuals with the pensions of the elderly. Could he tell me how many of the people who will lose the winter fuel allowance in his constituency earn less or receive less than the minimum wage?
In my constituency, there are approximately 2,600 pensioner households that do not receive pensioner credit, and that is one of the legacies of the last government, but they are entitled to it. Now, the party opposite suggests that they would have rejected the pay review body recommendations, forgetting that one of the first acts of the Margaret Thatcher government in 1979 was to accept the recommendations of the Clegg Commission on pay comparability, if only the party opposite had more courage today.
Serious government.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the winter fuel allowance exists because of a Labour government. A government that increased the value of those payments fivefold in 13 years compared to an increase of 0 under 14 years of the previous government, a real terms cut of 33%. I will give way.
Thank you very much to my honourable friend for giving way. And it's fascinating to hear the recent converts to the fight against poverty on the opposite benches, particularly the honourable member for North West. I'm sorry, Basildon and Billericay. Yet they seem far more quiet about the fact that the average food shop went up by £1,000 in the last Parliament. The average energy bill went up £400. Listen, you might learn something. The average mortgage went up, because of your lot, £2,880. Apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker. Apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Evans.
Your guidance, please, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was under the impression that for parliamentary language we should refer to members, friends, or even a constituency. Is that correct?
The honourable member is absolutely correct in that. Could I just helpfully point out to all honourable and right honourable members that in seeking to make repeated interventions, they're actually cutting into each other's times. I have made the point previously about the correct way to address each other, or indeed through me as a member of the House, in interventions. The interventions need to be a great deal shorter, because it is just cutting into the time for the debate, and there are an awful lot of members who wish to contribute. Lawrence Turner.
Thank you. Very quickly.
I'd
like the advice from the Chair, please. Reportedly, more than 200 Labour MPs received more than £2 million in donations before the election from the trade unions. Before other members give speeches about issues such as public sector pay, wouldn't it be in order for them to declare that interest at the beginning of their speeches?
As the honourable member will know, it's for individual members to declare their interest if there is one applicable. Can I return to Lawrence Turner, please?
I've declared my background in the trade union movement, and I note that the honourable member wrote the manifesto that he stood upon that proposed cutting the winter fuel allowance. Madam Deputy Speaker, now that winter fuel allowance is to be means tested, we must boost uptake in pension credit. I welcome measures that ministers have announced today so that the allowance can be protected for very poorest pensioners.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This government's choice to remove the winter fuel payment from 21,365 of my constituency, Kings Swinford and South Staffordshire, is cruel. The payments have been a lifeline for so many pensioners, helping them to stay warm during the harsh winter months. And with most pensioners living on fixed incomes, particularly having almost no notice, no time to prepare, means that the impact on many pensioner households of this loss of income will mean it will be increasingly difficult for them to afford basic necessities. Now, there have been a number of speeches opposite that have talked about difficult choices, but the reality is that this government has run away from difficult choices. It's ducked the difficult choices. The difficult choice would have been, during the election campaign, to have been upfront with voters, to have explained why they felt that this was necessary, appropriate, and, as some have said, morally right, and trusted voters to decide whether to give them that mandate. Instead, they ran away. There are difficult choices, but unfortunately the difficult choices are the ones that they have left our constituents to face. Of course.
Thank the member for giving way. Would he agree with me that this sets a dangerous precedent? Free bus passes, prescription charges, indeed access to healthcare itself are all now at risk because of the logic being put forward by the party opposite in terms of pensioners being able to afford to pay for these things.
My honourable friend is clearly correct, and there will be many people, but particularly pensioners, who will be worried as to what this Chancellor of the Exchequer has next, what she's going to take away from them next. Because without these payments, many will be forced to choose between heating their homes or other essential expenses such as food or medication. People like my constituent Linda, who wrote to me, "My husband has had several medical issues this year, and I'm very worried about the heating situation. I think it is likely that we will cut back on nourishing food. I cannot believe that a British government would penalise our generation like this." Or another constituent, Dawn, who writes, "Now I fear the winter months and afraid of hypothermia. I personally am just above the threshold to qualify for pension credits. I am a single person, claiming state pension, and also have a small NHS pension. I can foresee me not using my central heating this winter." Those are difficult choices that this Chancellor, this government, has forced on too many of our pensioners, and they are choices that nobody should have to make, but particularly those who have contributed so much to our society. Now, of course I'll give way.
Honourable gentleman for giving way. Now, the government that he supported was responsible for driving living standards down the first Parliament where that happened on record. Does he not agree with me that it's traditionally bad form for the arsonist to start criticising the fire brigade?
Well, I mean, I think the honourable gentleman has a huge amount of cheek when he looks at, firstly, the inheritance of that previous Conservative government that had to actually, as the candidate for the Business and Trade Select Committee wrote, there was no money left. Whereas, of course, what we saw during those 14 years was not only restoration in the economy, that huge growth in pensioner income, but, of course, now the fastest growth in the G7, unemployment at record low levels, and inflation back at low levels. Now, the Chancellor wants us to imagine that this is a decision that suddenly came to her some point in the run-up to the King's speech. Sometime after the general election, it would not have been possible for her to have imagined this before polling day. She claimed in July that it was not a decision she wanted to make. Yet, as has been said, in March 2014, she stated barely feet away from where I'm standing now, standing at the opposition front bench at the dispatch box, demanding that winter fuel payments should be means-tested. Whereas in July, she said it was not a decision she expected to make. And yet, miraculously, this year's Labour manifesto was the first in almost 2 decades without that specific commitment to protect winter fuel payments. This is a decision that had been a decade in the making, a decade in the planning. They had a decade to prepare and get it right. And yet we are seeing how poorly thought through that we can't have a Social Security Advisory Committee report, that we can't have the impact assessment, that they imagine you can take this money away from pensioners with no impact on our NHS or on charities. It is wrong. It needs to be reversed.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many right honourable and honourable members opposite have thrown the word choice at us. Now the party opposite chose empty promises. They chose unfunded policies. They chose a course that led to the decimation of our public services, to higher mortgage rates, to higher bills, and they chose to make the former Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk Prime Minister. Now, we didn't want to make this choice, but some choices are thrust upon us. On this side, we don't duck choices. This government is choosing long-term economic stability, economic security and growth. This government is choosing to maintain the triple lock, which will see the state pension rise year on year. This government is choosing to do all in its power to make sure that the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pensioners claim pension credit, and they'll do a lot more. I will give way.
Does he agree with, does the member opposite agree with me? It's deeply disingenuous for himself and other members opposite to talk about the drive to increase the uptake of pension credit when he knows full well that if he were to actually do that, it would wipe out the saving that they're claiming to make. They don't actually want people to increase their uptake of pension credit because they wouldn't save any money.
Save any money.
I just remind the honourable member that the word disingenuous is almost akin to suggesting that someone is lying. Perhaps he'd like to withdraw that.
I'll replace disingenuous with deeply, deeply concerning.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention and for clarifying his use of language. I can assure him that everyone on this side and my colleagues on the front bench are doing everything they can to make sure that pensioners, the vulnerable pensioners who need pension credit, receive it. It is said in good faith, and we mean that. I will, of course, give way.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for giving way. What does he say to the 18,883 pensioners in my constituency who are going to be losing the winter fuel payment, including Rita, who looks after her husband who has MS, who wrote to me today to say that she is having to make the choice this winter between heating their home and paying for essential medication?
Thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. What I say to him and to his constituents is that we are, on this side of the House, making every effort to ensure that vulnerable pensioners and the pensioners who need pension credit receive it, and we are sticking by the triple lock to make sure year on year that pensioners are better off, and I'm glad and proud that we are doing so. I'll make some progress if I may. I've taken 2 interventions. Now, this government is choosing to move on from the terrible choices of the previous government. Yep. We're choosing a stable, strong economy, Madam Deputy Speaker, that will benefit all of the people of this country, all demographics, all regions, the next generation, and very definitely pensioners.
Any chance?
Fuel poverty is an enormous issue in my constituency of North Herefordshire, a combination of demographics, geography, housing stock and indeed living standards. And I rise today to speak on behalf of the many hundreds of my constituents who have written to me to express their deep concern about this policy from the government. I don't have time to read you extracts from all of their very moving emails, but I know that Judy, Kenneth, Pat, Tom, Robert, Gwen, all of them are deeply concerned about the impact that this will have. They've reported to me their health issues, the disabilities of their partners, the fact that they're just over the limit and they will not be able to access this. This will force them into that classic depressing choice between heating and eating that we must avoid as a country. And so I have voted against the government's policy today because, for 3 reasons. It is socially regressive. It's going to increase poverty among about 2 million people, nearly 1 million of whom ought to be getting pension credit, and despite the efforts that the party opposite are making, it's nowhere near fast enough to avoid that increased poverty this winter. But in addition to being socially regressive, it is economically innumerate. It won't save the money that it is argued to save. There are far better ways to save that money and to fund the action that certainly is needed to fund our public services. And finally, it is frankly politically inept. I really can't believe that this government has spent political capital on making such an unfortunate, unjustifiable political decision. Now, the winter fuel payment is never was a perfect policy. I have some sympathy with members who've spoken today about the inequity of the inclusion era, that those with significant wealth were still receiving it, but that has been replaced by a policy with an enormous and dangerous era of exclusion of those 2 million people who will no longer get the support that they need. I will give way.
Of course, millionaires don't need the winter fuel payment, but will the honourable member agree with me that there must be support for pensioners who really need it rather than this cruel cliff edge? especially those living in rural areas like my constituency of North Cornwall who aren't connected to the mains gas grid.
I thank the honourable member for his point, and like him, I live in a rural constituency with many people who aren't connected to main sources of power. It is a key problem, this cliff edge, and it has been referred to today by members from across the House. There must be a better way, and that requires a better sort of politics. I've sat in this chamber today for the entirety of the debate, this one and the one before on the statutory instrument, and I've been frankly very disappointed by the tone of some of the comments and the discussion, the debate, the argumentation that I've heard. That is the sort of politics that puts people off what we do here in this chamber. This is a classic issue where we need to find ways to speak better about such fundamental issues. There must be an option to find some common ground. And so in the spirit of constructive criticism, constructive engagement, I would like to urge the government to stop, to review, to think again, to work out a way where their need to find funding for public services can be done in such a way that it doesn't place the burden on those with not the broadest shoulders, but effectively the narrowest. To find a way where we're not just talking about how we deal with fuel subsidies, but also making sure that every house is warm and well insulated, so that money is not just going through the chimney, out of the windows and into the pockets of the energy companies, but actually we invest for the long term so that every home is warm and every pensioner can keep warm. Thank you.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 2 months ago, the party opposite was elected to government promising change and that they would be a government of public service. While their announcement to cut winter fuel payments is change, I doubt it is one that millions of pensioners up and down the land thought that they would make. In terms of a government of service, I struggle to think of a greater disservice to millions of pensioners than taking away their winter fuel payment, on which they rely. Pensioners who have worked hard all their lives deserve dignity and respect in their retirement instead of this harsh and ill-judged policy from Labour. Now, many of those pensioners will be forced to make a tough choice this winter about having the heating on as energy prices rise and temperatures drop. The government have admitted to me in a response to a parliamentary question that shockingly they believe 15,744 of my constituents in Epping Forest will have their winter fuel allowance withdrawn by the Labour government this winter, among over 8.6 million pensioners right across England who will have this lifeline withdrawn. This could have so many implications for the health of older people who spend more time inside their homes when facing conditions, some of them needing social care. There is a real concern that being cold at home may have a detrimental effect on people's health, as we've heard from some of our medical colleagues today. Respiratory disease, raising blood pressure, increasing the risk of strokes and heart attacks, and even leading to hypothermia. It is recommended by the UK Health Security Agency that temperatures be 21 degrees Celsius in living areas and 18 degrees in bedrooms, which pensioners now this winter are going to struggle to do.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I'd be great to give way. Yeah, very happy to give way.
My honourable friend for giving way. In Stone, Great Worley and Penkridge, over 19,600 pensioners are going to lose their winter fuel payments. And of course, so many of them are incredibly proud and they do not want to be applying for additional benefits. And so many of them will just be outside of being able to be eligible. And actually the decisions of this government condemning them to a cold and incredibly hard winter.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for that intervention. He's exactly right that many people are going to be too proud to actually claim these benefits, and many people are going to be just above this cut-off point. And these people have been portrayed by some of the members opposite as being rich and able to deal with this. Well, that is not the case. Now, I was proud that our previous Conservative government provided not only the winter fuel payments, but extensively supported older people and the country during the difficult times through the pandemic and the effects of the war in Ukraine. And very importantly, that it honoured the Conservative triple lock, meaning pensioners get the increase in pensions that they deserve. Now, I'm also proud that our party is continuing to defend older people and their security, including the parliamentary motion and debate today that triggered this debate and the vote, a compassionate Conservative motion that I was proud to sign. It should be clear that the economic decisions we make speak volumes about the values we have as a society and as a country. How the Labour government respond to this winter fuel debate and how they respond in the upcoming budget is their chance to show where their values truly lie. This government needs to confirm that now and in the upcoming budget, their need to save money won't come at the expense of older people and the financial support that they need. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government really needs to think again about its move to cut winter fuel payments for the sake of millions of older people who need it and the implications it will have. If Labour choose to carry on with this heartless policy, my constituents can be assured, and the constituents of my Conservative colleagues, that I and my party will continue to stand up for our pensioners and maintain our call that the winter fuel cut be reversed.
After the next speaker, I'm going to reduce the time limit still further to 2 minutes, but the next speaker is going to get the full 3. Yuan Yang.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my constituency of Earley and Woodley, my volunteers and I have been out speaking to residents across the constituency every weekend since the general election. And as with many constituencies, it is a very diverse constituency with diverse needs. Over the last weekend, we were speaking to residents and pensioners who were relatively well off and who told us that they felt that it was right that the winter fuel payment be means tested. That is part of their sense of dignity and their sense of generosity that they do not need to be the recipients of state aid in this respect. There are also other parts of my constituency where pensioners are less well off. And I was shocked to find that 1 in 3 pensioners who are eligible for pension credit in my own constituency, which amounts to roughly 1,000 pensioners, and also 1 in 3 pensioners across the UK, or 880,000 pensioners who are eligible for pension credit, are not claiming it. And to give an example of the kinds of reasons why that is not happening, I was at the Whitley Community Development Association cafe over the weekend, holding one of my first surgeries in the constituency. And I overheard a conversation in which one of the members of the cafe staff told me that when they see people coming in need, pensioners coming in need, they talk to them about the struggles that they face with the cost of living crisis that has unravelled over the last few years. And they talk to them about the need for support, but the response comes back from that elderly person that, no, I don't need benefits, I don't need help. And I recognise that as being part of a broader societal stigma around being a recipient of benefits and a recipient of state aid, which I think we must defeat and challenge during the course of our government. Because to be part of a compassionate, generous and dignified society is to recognise when you require help, when you don't require help, and when you can help others. And part of that is to accept that sometimes those of us may fall on hard times due to accident, due to bereavement, due to illness, due to means outside of our control. And for those people who need help, it is not undignified to seek that help. In fact, it is very important that every one of those pensioners who may be listening to me speak now, whether they be in my constituency of Earley and Woodley or elsewhere in the UK, know how to seek help and can seek help if they need it. I'm very determined that we can bring about a dignified and fair means-tested benefits and tax system. And it is the fairness and the dignity in that system that can keep it together, that can keep it functioning. Finally, I want to refer to comments made by other honourable members across the benches about civility in this debate. I think it's too often that we hear in this discussion members of our society and groups in our society pitted against each other. Pensioners in my constituency of Earley and Woodley are part of their broader community. They have children and grandchildren who work in hospitals. They have children and grandchildren who require care, who require the support of their teachers, who take buses, take trains, and yes, avail themselves of all the means of support that we need in our society to keep a flourishing and cohesive society. And I think that it is unacceptable.
Rebecca Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. About 20,000 pensioners in Castle Point are set to lose their winter fuel payment under this rather cruel and vindictive policy that the Labour government has chosen to adopt. I have run, contrary to the accusations from the government benches, I have, with the support of former DWP ministers, run campaign after campaign to increase the uptake for pensioners to receive pension credit. And we are only, I think, up to 2,076 people receiving that, despite campaign after campaign and me leafleting school groups and churches. So it is not an easy thing to get people to take it up. Some people are proud. I've actually had to lose my voice, temper actually. I raised my voice at elderly ladies who were saying they are too proud, it's charity. And I said, no, it's not. It's not charity. We don't think you can live without it. So we have tried very hard. And I'm very... The hundreds now of worried constituents who have written to me about the heating of their homes. I've got sadly, a lot of very low energy efficiency homes, and I've got one of the biggest park home sites in the country, of my many park home sites. That fortunately we managed to find £2.5 million for the previous government to retrofit some of them, but we still have a lot of people living in fuel inefficient homes that are very hard to retrofit. And the worry that this is causing them is the biggest issue I see right now. And I think it shows how out of touch and arrogant the Labour government is, that they don't understand this about pensioners. When you are elderly and you are 75 and you have a fixed income, you may have a little bit of saving or a little tiny modest private pension.
Lady, give
I will
way.
happily give way.
I think I'm joining everyone in the House when we're all very disappointed not to see a proper impact analysis placed before this House that shows the impact of this decision. But does she agree with me that the best way of analysing the impact of a policy like this is to speak to the people who sent us to this place, as she's talking about, and hear the utter fear and concern they have for the impact that they will have?
Absolutely spot on. It is the anxiety that this causes people. You don't know if you're going to live another 18 months or 25 years. You are very worried on a fixed income with no ability to raise your income in any other way about spending money. There is also a large and sadly growing cohort of elderly residents who are developing dementia, for which one of the most often early symptoms is a financial anxiety. Sometimes people who think that who we would think of as really quite wealthy. I have known residents who have regressed to thinking that they are living still under rationing as they grew up as a lad in abject poverty and will not spend that money. But being told here's £300 for fuel makes the world of difference to all those people. Now, Gordon Brown, I was not a fan of, and now he gave a derisory 75p increase, I think, 1 year to the pensioners. But this policy has been a huge success, credit to him, which is why my government never changed it. Because for £300 for every pensioner, we give incredible amount of peace of mind that they can put their heating on, and that is... Sorry, I'd be very happy to give away.
I think my friend for giving way. Does she worry as I worry that some of her constituents will die this year as a result of this policy?
I don't think I need to worry. I think we know that that will happen because we know about their behaviour, we know how their concerns about putting the heating on, their lack of understanding about how much every heating bill is actually going to cost them. This £300 was a psychologically very important thing to know they can put their heating on and keep them healthy and out of hospital. So, you know, of all the tough decisions we had to look at when we came into office in 2010, when there wasn't a magicked up, homemade 22 billion black hole excuse. There was a vast, vast deficit. And we made a lot of tough decisions, but we never made this one.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I was going to say and open up that I'm sure the members opposite never thought on the general election campaign they would be giving pensioners the choice between heating and eating. But many of the opposite benches haven't even bothered to turn up for something that is so critical to many pensioners across this country. And we have talked about choices. This is all about choices. The government has made a political choice. Members opposite will all have to make a choice to face their constituents and go and vote for or against this. And I urge them to not cut this winter fuel allowance. But let's go on this little journey, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you'll let me have a bit of a narrative of they imagine this black hole, they say there's a debt they've got to fill. So let's have a look at these numbers, £22 billion. So let's cut £1.1 billion, and in the same breath, add £9 billion for the pensioners. The red herring that is the great British energy flop is another £8.4 billion, all in the same time of doing that. That is a decision that they have made. But why would the Labour Party let numbers get in the way with a good story? So they have no issues of actually making those decisions against pensioners. And then next Next, in November, we stand on Remembrance Day as a proud veteran and we ask people to remember those that paid the ultimate sacrifice and served their country. And I challenge the members opposite to look at your pensioners in your country that have served and say, we will never forget, because they have already been forgotten.
People who've... give way.
I will do, yes.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the spirit of what my honourable friend is describing, I would like to cite an example in my constituency, constituent of mine, Betty Webb, who received an MBE, having served as a former Bletchley Park codebreaker. Betty is 101 years old. She's a single lady, a widow. She lives alone. She is living right now in fear that not just the government is going to take away the winter fuel allowance, but they will snatch away in future the 25% single persons discount on council tax. And I know that so many other constituents of mine are fearful of the same.
My honourable friend raises a great point. The pensioners are living in fear of what is coming next. And it's constituents like mine and yours that have given a life of service to this country. And in South Shropshire, almost a third of my residents are pensioners. And they have been writing to me, they are absolutely livid. They feel that they've been led down a garden path, this was not what was promised, and this is being taken away. It is cruel, it is heartless, it is callous. This policy needs to change. And I know that the Chancellor has made a rookie error. She's gone into the Treasury, given what they were given, everything in front of her, and said, do this, but she has removed the political or personal views of this. No, it's a political decision she's made. So I suggest, if you want to of course it's a rookie error. This is a massive error. She has listened and removed people out of the equation. When you remove people out of politics, it is a road to nowhere. So I'm asking if the Chancellor can go and see the Downing Street Chief of Staff and ask for permission to reverse this.
Rebecca Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of South West Devon, nearly 22,000 of my constituents will lose their winter fuel payment, and only currently 1,500 receive it. That's a massive cliff edge for those 22,000 residents. And whilst many of them may feel that they don't require that payment, as has been mentioned by some honourable members today, the vast majority of those pensioners in my constituency would fall into low and middle income brackets, because we're in the South West where things just do not have such high financial values. Many of the properties, as has been alluded to by the member for North Cornwall, are also off-grid. And did you realise that 24% of homes across the South West do not have gas, that much cheaper source of energy than many people are able to use, who resort to using oil and logs to heat their homes with the enormous costs that go with them? So we've got that additional challenge. Touched upon already has been those who are single, those in receipt of the older basic state pension, which is not as high as the new state pension, and those with health conditions. And one resident who was perhaps the first who contacted me, 74 years old, single man on an older style pension, yet just outside of the bracket for pension credit or any other form of benefit, who is deeply concerned.
Honourable friend, good way. Thank you. My honourable friend makes a very good point about those with health conditions, and I hope she'll agree with me that there is no provision within this for those living with dementia or long-term frailty. Dementia and long-term frailty are not means-tested diseases or conditions, yet the government has not made any provision or any assessment of how those living with dementia will miss out.
Yes, absolutely. I do agree with you, and he's raised my honourable friend has raised an incredibly important point about those vulnerable older people who do live with dementia, and many of our constituents will be in that situation. And actually that brings me neatly to the point I was going to end with, but I'll mention it now, which is, why are we not looking at other alternatives for how we can deal with this cliff edge? I don't know if you remember, but our benches here produced the council tax rebate scheme a couple of years ago, and we used the council tax system as a mechanism for ensuring that the most vulnerable received that support, which enabled any household in receipt of it because of dementia or because of single person or because they didn't have a particularly high income and received council tax credit to receive the discount on that council tax rebate, which I believe could be replicated here with the winter fuel payment, which offers an alternative way of avoiding that cliff edge for so many of our residents. But just finally, health has already been mentioned, but I want to use this as an opportunity to highlight the fact that so many more elderly people are going to need hospital care, but that's massively impacted and at risk because the party opposite will not confirm which of the new hospital programmes are going forward, and in particular the emergency and urgent care centre in Plymouth that is going to be vital to providing the health care that our older people need if they are not able to heat their homes and are not able to look after themselves and ensure that they have all the support that they need. Thank you.
Anne Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was only 2 months ago that Labour won a majority in the general election on a message of change. But in those 2 months, the new Labour UK government has refused to abolish the cruel two-child benefit cap and now seeks to take away winter fuel payments of up to £300 from millions of pensioners across the UK, making it limited to recipients of pension credit. Well, nothing has changed. 68% of households in Carmarthenshire live in homes with poor energy efficiency in 2022, and 60.4% of households in my Caerfyrddin seat live off the gas or live off the gas grid, often relying on oil as a heat source, the price of which is very volatile, and in winter we can see it going up by 20 or 30 pence a litre, and this causes uncertainty for people budgeting over winter. And not heating a home can have serious consequences. A cold home brings with it a higher risk of stroke, respiratory infection and falls and other injuries. In fact, the End Fuel Poverty Coalition estimated that nearly 5,000 excess winter deaths were caused by living in cold homes during the winter of 22-23, and many older vulnerable people have higher energy costs due to health reasons. It's a shame that the Minister of Policing, Fire and Crime Prevention misspoke earlier this week, as the consideration of other options such as the social tariff or different ways of means testing would be welcomed. And as constructive criticism, could the government bring the winter fuel payment within the definition of a taxable income to ensure that pensioners get what they need? And just to finish, I call on colleagues of this House to consider whether they can justify the terrible consequences.
Order. Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak on behalf of the 20,800 pensioners in Rutland, Stamford and the Harbour and South Kesteven villages who will lose their winter fuel payment this winter. This decision affects millions of people who bought into our country's social contract. You work hard, you pay your taxes, and when you grow old, we will support you through your retirement. I make 2 requests to the Labour government today, although I know that they'll both be rejected. First, implementation. Give them time. Older people are some of the most financially cautious in our society. They save, they go without, they avoid debt, they give what they can to their children, their grandchildren, friends in need. A delay of a year would give people the time to claim pension credit, if eligible, and face the upcoming increase in energy bills and plan for the next winter. Secondly, I would ask the government to give an exemption to anyone suffering from a chronic or life-shortening illness. Yes. Since this cut was announced, I've heard from so many, like Di, who emailed me out of concern not for herself, but for her husband Jeff, who suffers from cancer and has to wear 3 layers of clothes all year round, even in summer. As Di put it, the decision, and it is a decision by the Prime Minister, is penalising the ill. Her hubby will suffer, and she is shattered. We will hear a lot from the government about hard choices. But if I was asked to choose between heating the homes of elderly, cancer sufferers, dementia sufferers, or giving a no-strings-attached pay rise to train drivers already on nearly 70,000, the choice would be pretty damn obvious to me. But then ASLEF didn't donate to my election campaign. People say you can tell a lot about a society by how it treats its most vulnerable and its eldest. Apply that test to this cut, and anyone with a heart knows that it is wrong. And I, for one, will never vote to deprive the most vulnerable and our elderly of warmth. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was 14 years old, I started delivering Meals on Wheels on Christmas Day to the disadvantaged around West London, and I've done so every year since that I've lived in London. It's organised by Age UK, and it's a privilege to be invited into people's homes in midwinter. I look forward to doing it again this Christmas, and I do hope that those I visited last year will be there this. The government is seeking to raise money. I get that. They're seeking to do so by getting those with the broadest shoulders to take the heaviest load. And I get that too. And in order to achieve these goals, the government is means testing the winter fuel payment. And there's the rub. By choosing the means test that they have, the government is indeed taking the winter fuel payment from millionaire pensioners. But they are also taking it from the much less well-off and from the not well-off at all. In short, they are cutting too deep. But look, mistakes happen. It's how you deal with mistakes that's important. I spent the weekend listening to the Prime Minister using the word tough as many times as he possibly could. On the battlefields of the world that I've been on for the last 25 years, toughness wasn't one of the things that people looked for in their leaders. The two things were courage and competence. Courage, moral courage, sometimes means that you need to admit when you've made a mistake and change your plan. But the people of Spelthorne, and I suspect the pensioners around this country, would just settle for a bit of competence. This government needs to get good at governing, and it needs to do so quickly.
John Cooper.
We've heard descriptions today of pensioners as millionaires. We've heard that this is a principled decision to cut money from them. I'm astonished at this description of millionaires. I also am from the southwest, like my honourable friend, the southwest of Scotland. And I can count on one hand, I would suggest, the number of millionaire pensioners there. Even if their homes were worth millions because they have risen through no fault of their own in price, that is asset rich. And asset rich is very different to cash and liquidity rich. If you are hit with a bill, you cannot sell your home.
Yes, that's right.
This leaves people in an absolute bind. And we've heard very little today from the SNP, because in Scotland, the SNP government there has the ability to ameliorate this decision should it go ahead. It would cost, they estimate, 160 million. That's not buttons, not peanuts, I accept that. However, the last government, the last Conservative government, sent £41 billion to Scotland. And I think that we should be able to find that money in Scotland to help the worst off in our society. I think this is a wrong-headed decision. I'm astonished to hear that it's being described as a privileged decision. Thank you.
Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since the announcement of the government's plan to change the winter fuel payments, I and colleagues across this House have been inundated with heartfelt stories of elderly people across the country who will be unfairly harmed by the removal of the winter fuel allowance. And it is concerning that the impact hasn't been properly assessed before the government taking this step. In Chichester, we have 24,000 pensioners who are not receiving pension credits, many of whom sit just above the threshold. Constituents like Sherry, who is 80 and registered disabled, and to maintain an even living temperature, she has to deal with her conditions while living in a 100-year-old cottage with poor insulation. Or Roy and his wife, who are in their late 80s, who've burnt through their meagre savings covering the rising energy bills during this cost of living crisis. Or Vicky, who writes to me about having to choose between eating and heating in the coming winter months, because she will not be able to afford to do both. Our elderly who have worked hard throughout their lives are now being abandoned by a government that should be supporting them when they need help the most. The Liberal Democrats understand the disastrous state of our public finances that have been left due to the fiscal mismanagement of the previous Conservative government, and we recognise that tough decisions need to be made. However, these decisions should not be made at the expense of our elderly. The burden of this Conservative fiscal chaos needs to be spread to those with the broadest shoulders, not punishing those who have already been hit hardest by it. Cutting the winter fuel allowance in the midst of a cost of living crisis will leave thousands of elderly individuals across Chichester and millions across the UK without the financial support that they need to stay warm and healthy this winter. With the price cap due to rise in October, it could be argued that the winter fuel allowance is needed this winter more than ever. Thank you.
Paul Holmes.
change that the government announced this morning will mean that 18,300 of my constituents in Hamble Valley will go without their winter fuel payment this Christmas. And I just wanted to set out in the brief time that I have why I believe that this is just a start from this government. The first reason is that cutting winter fuel payments for poorer pensioners is a political choice. It is not a necessity, despite what the Leader of the House says. And over the election period, Labour said it would not cut the winter fuel payment. They've broken their promise to the British people, and those people will remember. And they have also said that they would possibly do more, or they've denied that they wouldn't do more. The measures today will save £1 billion, as I outlined earlier in my intervention. But Labour have awarded inflation-busting pay rises to their union paymasters of £9 billion. And as we've heard from the Chancellor today, I will give way to the honourable member.
Could the member opposite explain to this House and his constituents why he wouldn't back fair pay rises for teachers, nurses, prison officers, the members of the armed forces in his constituency?
I won't take any lectures from him, but what I will say to him is that I would always defend pay rises for people in this country who deserve it, which is exactly what this government did. What this government hasn't done is awarded inflation-busting pay rises of 22% to the people that paid for their general election, which has actually meant that inflation has increased in this country. I believe people deserve pay rises, but I believe it should be within a fiscal envelope that's responsible, and this government simply hasn't done that. And as we heard from the Chancellor earlier, these measures that she's announced actually will cost more than the savings that will be generated from the winter fuel payments being scrapped. That's a shambles, I have to say to the government. And they've done it at a time when energy bills will increase by 10%, despite the promise that the Labour Party made opposite, that they would freeze energy bills. That's another broken promise that pensioners will have to face this Christmas. And they've also done it at a time where they have refused to rule out the scrapping of the 25% single occupancy discount for pensioners and single people across this country, which, if it does go ahead, will be on average another £600 that they will deprive pensioners of in this country. That is a political choice, and that is a choice of a cost of living bombshell that this Labour government, the supposed party of hard-working people, will be imposing on vulnerable and poorer pensions across this country. This government has a choice this afternoon, and it has a choice going forward. They should reverse this cut. They should stand up for the thousands of people in their constituencies who will be made poorer by this government. They need to reject the measures that they outlined earlier, because let me put it this way, 18,000 people in my constituency rely on that winter fuel payment, and thousands of their constituents opposite also rely on that winter fuel payment. And when they go to the ballot box in 4 years' time, I look forward to them standing up to their pensioners and explaining why they made them poorer.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my first speech in this chamber, I assured you all that my nan would keep me on my toes. Well, I can tell you that even before the cut to the winter fuel payments had hit the news headlines, she was on the phone to me to sort it out. My nan is one of 15,000 pensioners in Broxbourne who will end up losing £300 a year, a vital sum of money that would help them keep their homes warm this winter. Now, as the government's priorities are clearly dictated to them by their union paymasters, I've been tempted to advise her to start her own pensioners' union. As if there was one, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm assured that pensioners would have seen their winter fuel payments go up, not being abolished. But when you put the Chancellor's decision into context, it is even more staggering. Labour's deals with the unions, costing taxpayers £14 million, will see the average of the salary of train drivers, who are already well paid, rising from £60,000 to £70,000 a year. And at the same time, as the help for heating bills is taken away from the elderly, the energy price cap is going up by 10% in a few weeks' time. A double blow for pensioners. Was making it more expensive for pensioners to heat their homes in Labour's manifesto? It was not. In fact, we were told they would slash fuel poverty and save families hundreds of pounds. Yet another broken promise, and they've only been in power 10 weeks. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not only my nan who's been in touch with me about this. I've been inundated with letters and emails from hundreds of constituents. Madam Deputy Speaker, winter is coming and I strongly urge the government to change its course.
Thank you. I'll take Afro Brandreth, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency of Chester South and Edinburgh has a higher proportion of people in receipt of winter fuel payments than most other constituencies. Over 21,000 of them are set to lose this vital support. I've had constituents tell me that they face a choice between eating and heating. Others have told me that they are concerned for their health during the cold winter months. Their stories are a powerful reminder of the human cost of this decision. Stories like Maggie's. Maggie is 86 years old and lives in Hambridge in my constituency. She worked as a midwife in the NHS for 40 years and so has a state pension and a small NHS pension. She's not eligible for additional benefits because she was careful with what she earned and saved wisely. Maggie is just above the threshold for eligibility for continued support. She's also a dual cancer survivor, having beaten breast cancer in 2013 and bowel cancer in 2016. Maggie is understandably worried about the consequences of being unable to heat her home this winter. Or stories like that of Jackie and John, who live in Audlam, and like many people living in a rural village, they live off-grid and do not have access to mains gas. They must rely on heating oil to heat their home. Pensioners who have paid into the system all their working lives ought to be able to enjoy their retirement with dignity, security and respect. We all know in this House that to govern is to choose. Labour has chosen. They have chosen their union paymasters over our vulnerable pensioner communities. They have let Maggie, John and Jackie down, and many others like them. I urge this government to listen with compassion and reconsider this political decision.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, for over 5 years I have been raising the issue of impact assessments and the fact that they don't make sense. And the shadow frontbencher nodding along, knowing that I have been raising this issue. The impact assessments are done on a stupid basis. The basis on which they have to be done doesn't make any sense, certainly doesn't make sense in today's world. If only the shadow frontbencher changed it when they had the opportunity, we wouldn't be in this situation today. But the Labour Party have got the opportunity to change the way that we do impact assessments so that actually they make sense, so that actually it's not just about whether or not businesses will be impacted to the tune of £5 million, so that actually what matters to people, whether or not people's lives will be impacted by a change in a policy, so that that's the point at which impact assessments are done. We don't have an impact assessment for this policy. Does the Labour Party know, does the UK government know, that single women are 3 times more likely to be missing out on pension credit than single men? Does the Labour Party know that pensioners who are black or from Asian ethnic backgrounds are more likely to be in poverty if they're pensioners? They're more likely to be in poverty than white pensioners. Do they know, therefore, that this decision has a differential impact on minority communities? And is that why they've refused to share the impact assessments with us? Because they know about the impact. How will this, Madam Deputy Speaker, grow the economy? How will it grow the economy to ensure that pensioners, who we know spend in their local communities, have got less money to spend in those local shops? The issue with this, the issue with all of this, is not whether we've got a Tory government or whether we've got a Labour government. It's that Westminster consistently fails to work for the people of Scotland.
Joy Morrissey.
I find it slightly ironic that we're debating this policy today, and it is about political choice. A policy brought in under Gordon Brown, a social democratic policy of inclusivity for everyone to buy into the state, being scrapped for a neoliberal means-tested policy that I think most Labour and actual socialists would be ashamed of. And I should declare an interest, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am a member of CARE Campaign for the Vulnerable, which helps elderly residents who have issues, medical issues, or are in care. And one of the issues is heating for them. And making sure that the elderly, who, by the way, these are the elderly who fought for the reconstruction of Britain in post-war London, in the UK, across the UK, having rations for years and years, paying their taxes. We have built this country on the back of their hard work and sacrifice, only to turn around and say, nope, we didn't even scrap it under 14 years of a Conservative government, but we're scrapping it as the first thing we do as a Labour government. And I'm not even blaming the minister. I knew the minister. I knew his parents. They were councillors with me in Ealing, true socialists, for the many, not the few. And I'm not sure that would apply here, if I'm honest, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is about political choice. This is about choosing to give your union paymasters a pay rise over vulnerable pensioners. This is about paying £9 billion for an energy company that will not generate a single watt of energy. This is about political choice and political will. And if we, the Conservatives, could keep a Labour policy for our entire government, it is shocking and disheartening that you are making that the Labour Party is making this choice right now. And thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Maybe in 2 minutes this can best be summed up in a lesser-known fable, The Farmer and the Viper. A farmer was walking through his field and it was very cold in the winter, and he found a viper just under the bushes, and it was cold and limp and almost dead. And the farmer knew it was poisonous, but he felt compassion for the creature, picked it up and put it in his pocket. And as the creature became warm, it reverted to type and bit him. And as he died in that field, he said, well, I got what I deserved when I shouldn't have shown kindness to a scoundrel. Now, why does that ring true? Because after 14 years of the Labour Party being out in the cold, the pensioners of this country backed the Labour Party into government. And they were under the impression that the Prime Minister, only in May 2024, goaded our government, saying, will the Prime Minister now rule out taking pensioners' winter fuel payment off them? But if you scratch the surface a little bit deeper, we see that the now Chancellor on the 25th of March 2014 said, we are the party that have said that we will cut winter fuel allowance for the richest pensioners and means test that benefit to save money. So this is not a response to a concocted black hole. This was a choice, and as Laura Klunsberg pointed out, a choice to pay the unions on the back of our pensioners. Now, the public aren't stupid, and the cartoonist Matt sums it up perfectly when he says, surprisingly, Robin Hood, nobody likes your plan to steal from pensioners to give it to train drivers. Now, I was in the chamber last week when the now Secretary of State for Energy Security turned around and said to our side, show a bit of bravery, even break the whip, and stand out from the crowd. Well, I'm disappointed that his side didn't take that advice, with only one MP doing that.
Another doctor, Dr. Kieran Whelan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to express my strong opposition to the government's decision to remove winter fuel payment from millions of pensioners, a move that will strip vital financial support from thousands of my constituents, people who've contributed to our country and helped build our country. The impact in Bexhill and Battle will be profound. Age UK estimates that more than 25,000 pensioners will lose their winter fuel payments as a result of this decision. More than 25,000. I hope the government understands just how significant this decision is in constituencies like mine. The government say they're focused on increasing the uptake of pension credit. But of course, if all those who are eligible to claim pension credit do so, the £1.4 billion the Treasury is expected to save from means testing the winter fuel payments will be dwarfed by the increase in the cost of pension credit. So they have to admit that ultimately they don't actually want all the pensioners to take up pension credit. Madam Deputy Speaker, our pensioners deserve better. The fallback of this government since they took office is to blame the previous government for all the unpopular actions they've decided to take. They claim the state of the economy is the reason to remove this vital lifeline for pensioners. But let's be clear about the facts. On a broad range of indicators, the situation they've inherited is significantly less challenging than the one we inherited in 2010.
We inherited an economy just out of the deepest recession since 1955. Labour left us with public sector net borrowing at 10.3% of GDP. Today it's at 4.4%. Unemployment in 2010 was 7.9%. Unemployment now stands at 4.1%. But through 2010 onwards, through all these difficult times, we made decisions to protect pensioners and we made sure to keep the winter fuel payments. It was the right thing to do then, and it's the right thing to do now. I ask the government to listen to MPs from across the House, including some on their own benches, and think again.
Carla Lockhart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister and members opposite tried to bring this country together after division and turmoil, and today I have to say they have succeeded. They've united the country, united it in opposition to this new Labour government and their attack on older people, the very people who deserve compassion, dignity and respect after their lifetime of hard work. I stand unashamedly, shoulder to shoulder with pensioners in Upper Bann and across the United Kingdom in their opposition to this reckless decision. Our pensioners are being left out in the cold by a government that promised to restore hope. Where is the compassionate Labour we were promised? Where is the restored hope? What hope do pensioners have in Upper Bann? What hope do they have that this government might listen, care for them and stop neglecting them? They now feel like they are the target. To be fair, this government has offered pensioners something to keep them busy through the cold winter months by suggesting they take a stab at completing the pension credit application form, a form with 243 questions across 24 pages with 9 weeks of a delay for a decision, asking pensioners to navigate a bureaucratic nightmare just to receive a fraction of what they need to survive. I stand here today united with my constituents, united with pensioners across this country in opposition to this faceless decision. In conclusion, no one is arguing that millionaires should get the winter fuel payment, but over 6 million of the pensioners set to be impacted by this decision are living on state pension. They are living on just over 11,000 a year. Could anyone in this House live on 11,000 per year?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Mid Norfolk is a constituency which is profoundly rural, 130 villages and 4 towns. And in that very rural constituency, as with all rural areas in this country, people are paying a surcharge because of energy costs, because of rurality. Colder weather, many of my houses are not on the gas grid. Rural areas traditionally have lower incomes. We have an elderly population. And the Treasury, very helpfully, it's a shame ministers didn't read it, last year did a piece of work to look at the risks of rural poverty and the higher risk of rural areas falling into rural poverty. And the Treasury's own figures showed that the average household at risk of poverty in rural areas needs an extra £800, or in layman's terms, it's a 2.5 times 250% higher risk of rural houses falling into rural poverty. So I find it completely extraordinary that this Labour government that professes to care about poverty, professes and has berated this party when in government about the risks of rural poverty and the risks of pensioner poverty, decides as its first act to punish people in rural areas. And it's because of those rural risks that I and a number of colleagues earlier this year set up the Fair Funding Alliance, supported by Acre, the Countryside Alliance and rural bodies. Higher fuel and energy prices are hitting rural areas, and we would have hoped this government might have listened. I'm proud that the Conservative Party in government upgraded the pensions, protected triple locks, took 200,000 pensioners out of poverty, and it is, I'll happily give way.
The former member for Thornbury and Yea introduced the triple lock, and this was actually a Liberal Democrat policy. Would the honourable member care to correct the record on that point?
Well, it was my good friend, the now noble Lord Willits, in a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats, and I'll happily debate with him some of the brave decisions we took. But the point is, this party, the Conservative Party, protected pensioners. We protected the triple lock. We lifted 200,000 people out of poverty. Yeah. And to see this Labour government decide, and the Minister put it very clearly earlier, this is an attack on people who own their own homes, people who've retired in rural areas and are just over the threshold, And in Labour world, they are millionaires.
Yeah.
And this will not be forgotten by people in my constituency, low-income rural pensioners who've saved up to be able to afford their own home and are now being clobbered.
Yeah.
And it's unfair, it's unjust, it's unjustifiable, it's unprecedented, and I urge and beg ministers to think again.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to voice my strong opposition to the Labour government's cruel choice to scrap the winter fuel allowance for an estimated 10 million pensioners across the country. Now, I have been contacted by hundreds of pensioners in my constituency of Keighley and Ilkley who are all incredibly concerned about the dire consequences of this government's decision. I've met with many of them in surgeries and also at the Keighley Agricultural Show just this weekend, who are telling me that they are going to struggle to pay their bills this winter, and statistics show that just over 64,000 people, pensioners across the Bradford district, of which 20,000 sit within my constituency, are going to be negatively impacted as a result of the Labour government's decision. And this, quite frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a disgrace. Now, Citizens Advice, Age UK and hundreds of charities across the UK have also come out against these proposals, warning that low-income households who are already struggling to make ends meet will be forced into impossible choices this winter, choosing between heating their homes or putting food on their table. So I must say it's incredibly disappointing to see that the Honourable Member for Shipley in the Bradford district vote with the government this evening, making sure that she is not standing up for the wider Bradford district, as I will be doing today. It is Labour's choice that we are putting pensioners at risk as a result of this decision, and it is Labour's choice that is putting my constituents, pensioners who are vulnerable, having to put them in a dire decision of making a decision of whether they heat their homes or put food on their table this winter. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I only hope that there will be quick changes that are made to make sure that pensioners are looked after in the run-up to winter.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 19,500 pensioners in Angus and Perthshire Glens will be stripped of their winter fuel payment by this Labour government. I can't tell you how cold it gets in Angus and Perthshire Glens in the winter time, but if anyone on that front bench wants to come and sit in my garage on a January day, I'll turn the heating off in the whole property and you can see what it will be like for some pensioners in my constituency. I won't be voting for this, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it's incompetent. It's incompetent operationally because it doesn't take cognizance of comorbidities in already frail people. It doesn't take cognizance of what will happen to these people as they budget to try and accommodate this unnecessary cut to their income. It's fiscally incompetent because it doesn't take cognizance of the whole system costs when these people present at hospital, when they go into care prematurely because they can't stay at home because of what they do to try and make ends meet. It doesn't take account of the cost to the supposed saving of £1.5 billion once full pension credit is taken up, rendering the saving meaningless. And it's morally incompetent, Madam Deputy Speaker, because frankly, as we've heard from professionals in this chamber today, as a result of this decision, people will die. Moreover, it wasn't in the Labour Party's manifesto. That is reprehensible. And it ignores the cultural sensitivities of older people, who, for many of whom asking for help is anathema to them, and they will never do it no matter how entitled they are. And I very much hope that when the Minister comes to sum up, they can make an estimate of how many of the 209 extra Labour MPs are in this House would be here, including the 37 in Scotland. How many of them would be here if you had cutting the winter fuel payment on the face of their manifesto? Very many fewer.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I speak today on behalf of the 19,300 pensioners in my constituency of Bridgewater who are now set to lose their winter fuel allowance. 23% of constituents are aged 65 or over, which is well above the national average. Many retired people in my constituency have done the right thing. They've worked all their lives. They've paid their national insurance stamp and now have a small private pension and modest savings. And because they've done the right thing, many of these pensions are not eligible to claim pension credit. This government is choosing to punish them for their prudent and conscientious choices made through their working lives by withdrawing this important means of support. Labour justify their decision to cut the winter fuel allowance by talking about their alleged poor economic inheritance. Let's take a moment to clear up some facts. In 2010, the budget deficit was about 11% of GDP, £157 billion. Today, it's about 4% of GDP. In 2010, unemployment was about 8%. Today, it's halved. It's about 4%. And in May 2010, inflation was 3.4%. Today, it's 2%. This isn't the worst economic inheritance since the war. Yes, of course.
I'm sure he agrees with me when I say that the economic inheritance that the government received is actually quite incredible, considering we put up with both, or we had to deal with both the COVID pandemic crisis as well as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which puts huge pressure on our economy.
My honourable friend makes an important point, and it just emphasises that when the Chancellor stands up and says that it's a tough decision that has to be made, she is actually making a political choice. She has chosen to pay train drivers earning £60,000 a year a pay rise of 15%. And she has chosen to cut the income of retired people with a pension of £15,000 a year. That was her choice, and the British people will judge her and the Labour Party on it.
Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let's be absolutely clear about what's happened today. Every single Labour MP who voted to cut the winter fuel allowance has broken their promise to the country. Pensioners know that before the election, Labour denied that they were going to do this. But they might not know that the Chancellor has been planning to do this for 10 years. In 2014, she said, "We should cut the winter fuel allowance for the richest pensioners and means test that benefit to save money." Are we supposed to believe that she changed her mind after that and then changed it back again shortly after the general election? I don't think so. Now, there may be a case for means testing, but the Chancellor isn't cutting it for the richest pensioners. She's cutting it for pensioners on very modest incomes. And she isn't making the case for it either. She's asking the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to do her dirty work for her. And if winter fuel payments are to be means tested, surely the proceeds should go towards low-income pensioners and the cost of social care. But it's not. It's going on above inflation pay rises for the likes of Labour donors as left.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Friday, in Boston, I was stopped by a pensioner, a lovely lady, Elizabeth. She shook my hand and burst into tears. Uncontrollable tears of fear, genuine fear. And she represented over 22,200 other pensioners in Boston and Skegness who will lose out by this cruel policy. The fear of being cold this winter, not knowing how cold. The fear of what will happen to energy prices in October. How high will they go in January? And the unbelievable fear of not knowing whether she will see the end of winter. Because yes, Madam Speaker, that is the reality. Older, colder people die early. We've heard about choices today a lot. And it's true. This government has made a very calculated, deliberate, heartless, cruel choice to enrich your union paymasters, to enrich the public sector workers with no requirements for productivity, to enrich well-paid train drivers, and to impoverish pensioners. Let me tell this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, voters will not forget and they will not forgive.
Harriett Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 17,047 pensioners in Gordon and Buchan will lose their winter fuel payment following today's vote by the Labour Party. But this decision for my constituents shows that they're being let down by both of their governments, at Holyrood and at Westminster. The Labour Party are choosing to let them down by cutting the winter fuel payment, and the SNP are choosing not to pass on the Barnett consequentials. In North East Scotland, winters are longer and harsher than in most of the country. Our temperatures often fall for a sustained period below -10, and it's not unusual in recent years to have had -20 in Aberdeenshire. For our pensioners, the winter fuel payment is not a luxury, it is a lifeline. And this is Labour Party's choice, as much as they would like to explain it away. Labour have chosen to cut the winter fuel payment. They have chosen this route, and they must face what that choice means. But Labour's choice now means that our pensioners have to make their own choices. So Labour's choice has become a pensioner's choice. But perhaps most shocking of all is that Labour have breathtaking hypocrisy on this issue. In 2017, they sat on these benches with their own research showing that cutting winter fuel payments could lead to almost 4,000 excess deaths. They then vehemently opposed any changes to what they called the vital support. So what's changed, Madam Deputy Speaker? Have pensioners suddenly become more resilient to the cold? Or have the Labour Party simply abandoned their principles to fund their own political choices? Yes. In my constituency, many pensioners still rely on solid fuels such as oil, so they fill up once a year their tank going into winter. That payment's going to be coming shortly. It's going to be coming before November, way before next year and any pension rises. How are these pensioners this year going to afford to fill their tanks and heat their homes in the months to come?
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for all the bobbing, but we do have to now go to the front bench. Shadow Minister Mims Davies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the honourable lady to her place on the front bench, and I do wish her well. And it is a pleasure to close this debate on behalf of His Majesty's official opposition. But sadly, that's where any pleasure at being at this box on this matter ends tonight. We have debated today a clear and stark choice made by this new Labour government and Prime Minister, and this black hole is what made me do it, Chancellor. It's a patently poor political choice that is wrong-headed and, frankly, a disgrace. It's a blatant choice that is for union paymasters while axing key support for 10 million pensioners. It's a reward to their funders. None of this in the manifesto or on election leaflets. It's pure subterfuge and hoodwinking. There is no charity, Madam Deputy Speaker, or group who fully backs this, given the timescales and delivery of this draconian, cack-handed way of delivering this. The government can bluster. They can say that they have been acting with the hand they were given, with faux anger, as we heard earlier. But they simply had no choice. This was a necessity. Due to the fantasy inheritance they were allegedly left. So let's look at the facts. Today, UK unemployment sits at 4.1%. Sterling is up against the dollar. Growth is outpacing inflation. And despite some very loyal speeches from the new members opposite and some very passionate speeches from all around the chamber, they know, many of those sat blank, mute, absent or maybe even stunned, that ministers are targeting our pensioners with so little notice as these nights draw in. Higher winter fuel bills loom under the cloak of dressing this up as a financial necessity. This is frankly staggering. It's a costly mistake from the Treasury under this Labour Chancellor that DWP will be shouldering, moving staff swiftly to cover the incoming impact of those applying for pension credit. And what about those expecting that they can pay for their pre-Christmas tank of off-grid oil with their £300 of expected support? This is demand surge for pension credit that must be met in both costs and delivery, and DWP ministers will be scratching their heads where the resource comes from for the reported surging in pension credit applications. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman if he can answer why he thinks this is a good idea.
I can assure the Minister I don't think this is a good idea in any shape or form. And it's just specifically on that point she raised about, and members have raised about, having no assessment having been done on this. Representing Northern Ireland, where 49.5% of homes rely solely on oil for heat, does she realise, and does the government realise, what additional pressures are being put on Northern Ireland pensioners in regards to this decision, where our Minister of Communities announced today 306,000 people will lose this payment?
I thank the honourable gentleman for standing up for his constituents. I absolutely agree. The disproportionate and deep impact on our cold spots in Northern Ireland, in rural areas, those living in the north, those living in Scotland. And indeed, it will be one benefit reform that is not easy. We bear the scars on this side of the House for UC, but actually the change was truly worth it. And I ask the Government, as the honourable gentleman has said, what does the impact assessment actually say? Who actually gains, and does this financially actually stack up? Because no, I think we all know it doesn't, else they would have not ignored the Social Security Advisory Committee process and its scrutiny. They would have done a proper impact assessment and a regulatory assessment, and they would have not have tried to avoid a vote on the floor of this House. The members opposite will troop through the lobby again as fodder for an out-of-touch Prime Minister, or perhaps abstaining to avoid the eyes of the Chancellor, deep in the hope that spraying billions of pounds on gimmicks like a shell company called GB Energy will be worth this. Be aware that in their communities they will have to face a few people to understand a few millionaires was worth the attack on millions. So let's take June. She, on the BBC, says she will struggle to stay warm this winter. She's already planning her jumpers, cardigans and candles. And my constituent Valerie from East Grinstead wrote to me, one of almost 20,000 affected. I'm 80 years old, I live on a state pension of less than £11,000, not on the £13,000 I keep reading about. I don't know who gets that much, but I certainly don't. She goes on to say, it will be a long, cold winter. Please do what you can do to get this dreadful decision reversed. Well, Labour members could join us in the lobby to back pensioners like Valerie. We, of course, welcome the Household Support Fund extension and the commitment to the Conservative triple lock. But we on this side of the House knew going into winter with energy bills going up, the right thing to do was to help with cost of living payments. So I can say, as an MP or a minister, in my experience, in the dead of night, worries of this job and our responsibility comes to us, and it comes to all members. And it will be in the darkness, in the cold, in the small hours that women and men who have served this country, supported families and communities, will be laying awake worried, fretting and feeling afraid. Because if you are frail, living with a disability or a health condition, your warmth matters. Your health, your loneliness, your isolation, your worry will eat away at you, because you simply can't take a job, do some extra hours to help make ends meet. Medics have warned this will have serious health threats, as has Age UK. These pensioners who are on low income matter. They truly are the people who know how to budget. They are the people that eke out and work out their finances. But nobody will work out how. This new Labour government of service has targeted those people so shamefully this autumn, and those families won't forget. They're not statistics. They're Valerie and June and the thousands of others in every community and constituency. They are proud pensioners who very often, too often, go without. And don't tell others that they'll be going without. And this winter, again, they will be going without for others. This is horrific. It's a blight on this new government. It's not right for this to happen to pensioners on their watch. Your choice. and I ask that honourable members and the Minister's office opposite do the right thing and stop this callous cut now.
Minister Emma Reynolds.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this has been an important debate with many right honourable and honourable members making important contributions. My honourable friends for Wirral West, Bracknell, Bishop Auckland, Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, Rugby and Makerfield rightly spoke about the importance of this government's action to restore economic stability so that we can rebuild our economy and our public services. And my right honourable friend for Birmingham Northfield rightly reminded us that a strong economy needs strong public services. And many honourable members, both on this side and I'm going to make a little bit of progress, on this side and on opposition bench, I said I will make some progress. Thank you. And many honourable members, including my honourable friend for Earley and Woodley, and indeed the honourable lady for Castle Point, spoke about the work that they're doing to encourage pensioners in their own constituencies to apply for pension credit to get the support that they need. I want to start by saying some more about the principles that underlie the government's approach to means testing winter fuel payments. Firstly, that most help should be targeted to those who most need it. Secondly, that significant support for all pensioners will come around by the triple lock. And thirdly, that alongside that, extra help will be available to those on low incomes. But before I do that, I will in a minute. Before I do that, I wanted to say something about means testing. I have found, both in this debate today and the debate in Westminster Hall earlier, where there were no Conservative members present, that there is indeed a lot of support for means testing the winter fuel payment. We heard from the Honourable Gentleman for Herne Bay and Sandwich. He said in this debate that he supports means testing this benefit. We have heard that the Right Honourable Lady for North West Essex, who is the Conservative leadership contest favourite, also supports means testing this benefit. I will give the right to the Honourable
Lady has misrepresented me. She knows perfectly well. Well, I said I supported the principle. I abhor the way that she's going about it.
Well, he indeed said he supported the principle, and indeed the Liberal Democrats in their manifesto of 2017 also said they supported means testing this benefit.
I thank the Minister for giving way, but I think she fails to understand that while we accept the principle of means testing, we accept that there are many pensioners who can afford not to have the winter fuel payment. The manner in which this has been brought in to this House by this Labour government and the way they are intending to do it with a sharp cliff edge, no accounting for the people close to the pension credits limit, we find abhorrent.
And I will come on to that in my contribution. But first I wanted to say how crucial it is to boost the uptake of pension credit. And that's why we are taking immediate action to increase that take-up, given we've got an estimated up to 880,000 eligible pensioners who are missing out on this support, worth on average £3,900. And I hope actually there can be some consensus across this House that we need to work together to boost that uptake. That's why last week we launched an initial Pension Credit Week of Action to boost awareness, and we will continue to raise awareness until the deadline for making a successful backdated pension credit claim on the 21st of December.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. On awareness, is she aware how much more it costs to heat a home in winter in Blairgowrie compared with Brighton or Belgravia?
I will come on to the issue that he raises in just a moment. But on pension credit, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and the Deputy Prime Minister have written to all local authorities asking them to redouble their efforts to reach those pensioners who could benefit from pension credit. And the front bench opposite might grumble, but it's a far sight more than they ever did when they were in power. We're joining forces with charities like Age UK and Citizens Advice to encourage pensioners to check their eligibility and apply. And we will be delivering a major campaign in print and broadcast media, including to urge people to reach out to retired family, friends and neighbours to get them to check if they are eligible. And for the very first time, I won't give way, we're writing to all pensioners on housing benefit who are potentially eligible to encourage them to claim pension credit. Again, something the last Conservative government never did. And over the last 5 weeks, we have already seen claims for pension credit more than double. And backed by over 450 additional staff, we will ensure claims are processed as quickly as possible. In the longer term, as my right honourable friend said in the debate previous to this, Secretary of State, we will bring forward the merger of housing benefit and pension credit as soon as operationally possible, something that the last government promised but failed to deliver. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're also taking action to ensure all pensioners get the income they deserve. Despite being urged to drop the triple lock for pensioners during the election campaign by the IFS and others, the government is steadfast in its commitment to the triple lock. This will mean that the triple lock has seen the state pension increase by £2,700 over the last 5 years. And it was increased by £900 this year and the previous year by £970. And according to the figures released today, which still need to be confirmed in October, we'll see an extra £460 a year from next April. I would also like to point out that the warm home discount of £150 will help low-income pension households this year. This is critically important because this isn't just for the lowest income pensioners on pension credit. This is for pensioners on low incomes who have high energy costs. And this will be open to application in October. I've said to the Honourable Lady I won't give way, and I won't give way, so she should sit down. And the government encourages honourable members to boost awareness and encourage people to apply for the warm homes discount. I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady, but I would like her to explain why this government has failed to extract any concessions from the train drivers and their union paymasters. Because I haven't finished. You have your digital centre for government, who is all ready to use technology to improve public services. And yet, this complete failure of negotiation, that price is being paid by our pensioners.
I honestly think the party officer have some brass neck. During their time in power, we lost on average of 3 million working days to strikes a year because of their failure to deal with industrial action. And we also lost 1.4 million NHS appointments which were cancelled, meaning pensioners and others were in pain for longer than they needed to be. We will not take lectures from the party opposite. We have had to take this difficult decision to means test the winter fuel payment due to the £22 billion black hole this year. They might not want to hear it, but they should apologise for leaving that black hole. This was created by repeated and reckless, unfunded spending.
Minister, is the point of order directly relevant to these current proceedings?
Just want guidance from you as to whether it could be appropriate for ministers and others on the benches opposite who have been directly funded by the trade unions not to declare that personal benefit before something like this, which hurting millions of pensioners.
Members are guided to talk about any conflict before they speak on the floor of the House. I'm not sure this directly impacts the proceedings, but your point has been noted.
Minister. Again and again, the Conservatives dividing working people against pensioners, and that is disgraceful. In In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, means testing the winter fuel payment is a difficult decision. I had no funding from ASLEF, and so the honourable member can withdraw his comment. But targeting support to the poorest pensioners, boosting the uptake of pension credit, maintaining the triple lock for pensioners, extending household support fund, the warm homes discount, in the longer term a warm homes plan to insulate people's homes. These are the right decisions to take. This government is determined to fix the foundations of our economy so that we can deliver the change that we were elected on, that this country and indeed our pensioners so desperately need, bringing down NHS waiting times.
The question is that the question be now put. As many of their opinions say aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. The question is, as on the order paper, as many of their opinions say aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Clear the lobby. Sit. You need to be seated, please. The question is, as on the order paper, as many of their opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tell us for the ayes, please. Tell us for the noes. No, do we have that?
Anna McLaurin and Mr. Mayor.
Yes, that is indeed. Okay. Thank you. Order.
The ayes to the right, 214. The noes to the left, 335.
The ayes 214, the noes 335. The noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock.